What happened the time you saw the fury of a patient man? Story number 1. I and a few of my friends used to frequent a pub in my hometown. It was a small place in the town center, a traditional English pub, complete with an attractive barmaid and consistent regulars, us included. Every time we were in there, a guy would be sitting at the bar, in a zone, with a half of bitterness. He'd occasionally join the banter, but was never loud or drunk. He was a nice bloke, always said hello and smiled. We knew him only as Ray. Now Ray was about 60, but fit. Not big, just a normal-looking guy. A few forearm tattoos, pretty standard for the north of England in the 90s. One Saturday afternoon, me and 4 of my friends were having our usual couple of drinks. As it was Saturday, there was a football match on. 3 away fans walk into the pub. Already a brave move. But this is a friendly place. Everyone eyes them suspiciously but carries on drinking. They walk to the bar and immediately start being horrible to the barmaid, making lewd comments, complaining loudly about the beer, etc. Ray looks at these 3 guys and says, "No need to be rude, boys. She's here to do a job." Cue a stream of verbal abuse from the away fans. "Shut the fuck up, granddad. What you gonna do about it?" etc. The regulars are having none of this. Everyone, me included, stands up and stares at these idiots. Ray turns to everyone and just says, "Sit down, lads. I'll deal with this." Turns to the away fans, "You 3, outside now." These 3 guys, obviously there for a fight anyway, are all, "Fucking come on then, granddad. Let's go." They all walk out of the bar and not 20 seconds later, Ray walks back in. Without a word, sits back on his stool and sips his half of bitter. Curiosity got the better of us, so we all ran outside to see complete carnage. 2 guys out cold on the pavement, one on his backside with blood pouring out of his nose. It turns out that Ray was an ex-SAS, and the barmaid was his daughter. Story 2. Working in an auto parts warehouse, one of our managers was very quiet, collected person. One particular day, some of the orders were wrong and the ordering system was malfunctioning. He calmly goes out back, starts up a forklift, and rams it full speed at a huge stack of wood pallets. He must have thrown it in reverse and repeated this about a dozen times, raising and lowering the forks appropriately. Everyone stopped working to watch as every last pallet was destroyed. When there was only a pile of wood scraps left, he turned off the lift and calmly walked back in and continued working as if nothing happened. Story 3. I didn't witness this, but my dad told me a story about his grandparents. My great-grandpa and grandma were British and came over sometimes in the 60s, I think. My great-grandpa fought in the Somme War during World War I and got captured by the Germans and held as a POW, so he had been through some shit. He was very quiet, generally pretty nice, but couldn't hear much. My great-grandma liked her sherry and was always nagging him and hassling him. So one day my dad and his siblings were at my great-grandparents' house. My great-grandpa was sitting in his chair by the fire, smoking his pipe while my great-grandma was going on about something. He was generally just ignoring her when she grabbed one of those fire pokers and threw it at him. He had his hands resting on the arms of the chair and the poker got wedged into the chair right in between his fingers. Didn't hit him though. So my great-grandpa quietly and unfazed got up, pulled the poker out and put it back in its place, and sat back down and said, "You won't be doing that again now, will we?" Apparently my great-grandma was just petrified, because he never said anything remotely confrontational. Story 4. My grandfather is a saint. My grandmother had a 99% fatal blood cancer back in the late 60s. They went to Cleveland Clinic as a last hope option. Neither were religious, but they prayed that night, and he promised to live his life as the best Christian possible if my grandmother was cured. 2 weeks later, while still waiting for treatment options, there was no blood cancer detectable anymore. So he's that kind of good Christian man. My aunt was 12 and she and the neighbor boy were making out on the couch. According to her, no hanky-panky. Well, the rumor mill went full tilt and the neighbor boy's mom comes over to the house to accuse my aunt of being a whore. Aunt opened the door and the lady called her a whore. Well, my grandma was in the kitchen and took off running. Spread the lady off the front porch and into the front yard and started beating on her. This isn't crazy. My grandma was fury bottled into a 411 frame. Well, neighbor's husband comes over to break it up and pulls my grandma off, then drew back like he aimed to hit her. My grandpa walked onto the porch about this time and said, "Buzz, if you hit my wife, I'll kill your whole damn family." Everyone I've talked to about the incident said the calmness in his voice is what gave them shivers. I've even talked to the old man Buzzard about it, and he tells it just like everyone else does. My dad said he had absolutely no doubt that my grandpa would have done it. He's never said anything and not done it. Story 5. One of my school teachers was the most patient, kind man who would work with you until you got something, even if it meant he had to miss his lunch. There was this girl who was a mouthy little shit. She would mess around in his class repeatedly. He always kept his cool even when she was being incredibly rude. Discipline never worked on this kid. I don't know how she didn't get expelled. One day she was drinking Coke in chemistry class and he repeatedly told her to stop because we were messing around with the chemicals and there was a contamination risk. But she didn't listen. After months of this kid giving him shit, he slowly walked over to her desk, picked up her Coke and poured it over her head, then walked back to the front of the class and carried on teaching. He got fired, much to our protestations. Story 6. My brother-in-law is a really soft-spoken guy that really kind of keeps to himself. That said, he's also huge, and built like Bam Bam Bigelow for all you 80s wrestling fans out there. In addition, he's covered in tattoos and on his head, neck, and everything. So you can imagine he's a pretty intimidating guy, which is why his soft voice and very chill demeanor can be really surprising. We're in a movie theater enjoying a flick when the kids behind us start acting up and throwing popcorn, talking, and generally making a ruckus. My brother-in-law stands up, turns around, and asks them to quiet down since they're disturbing everyone else. They behave for 15 minutes or so, but then slowly start acting up again. He stands up without a word, grabs the lead instigator by the throat, lifts him out of his chair one-handed, pulls him in close and growls, "Shut the fuck up," and sits him back down gently. The rest of the movie was very peaceful. Story 7. When I was in high school, an upperclassman at my all-male student Catholic school followed a female teacher into the bathroom and tried to rape her. She screamed initially before he pulled a knife on her. The gentlest, most caring, socially awkward Latin teacher heard the scream and rushed from his classroom straight into the women's restroom. He clocked this kid across the face and dragged him out by his collar into the hall. Then he checked on the traumatized female teacher. Later, he just went back to class and continued teaching as though nothing happened. Dude knows 7 languages, has never dated anyone, and is brilliant, always calm man. People gained a lot of respect for him after that day. He's still really weird though. Story 8. Gym class in high school, the quiet nerdy kid kept getting picked on during dodgeball. One jerk kept hitting him with balls even when he was already out. The quiet kid wasn't tiny, he was about average sized, maybe a little taller than average. He eventually lost his temper, ran across the court, and literally delivered a double-handed chokeslam to the jerk. Being a bunch of teenage boys, we all lost our shit cheering for him. He got suspended for 3 days, but it was reduced to 1 day in school after a bunch of us went to the principal and explained the circumstances. Story 9. Back in uni, one guy I knew on greeting and small talk terms but not much more was known as the literal rock against the waves. Childish freshmen picked on him for being retarded and all, for ages, and he just shrugged it off. You need to imagine him as a gentle giant, 6'9"-ish and with arms as thick as my thigh, but very sweet and lovable. Hobbies including caring for shelter kitties and posting reviews for oddly specific music theory books online. I eventually became friends with him, and we hung out sometimes, grabbing a coffee and such, and one day we were avidly discussing something when 3 of the childish freshmen came by and pestered him. He informed them twice that we were currently talking and they should not disturb us. Please and thank you. With foreseeable success, so he just shrugged and tried to continue our talk over the pestering. Frustrated that they did not succeed, one of them resorted to the last straw of a childish bully and called his mother a whore. Fun fact, his mother died when he was 14 and he never fully came to terms with it. He took a deep breath, stood up, and grabbed the offender by his head, swinging him like a club at the others and kicking them into next Tuesday when they all were on the ground before I and 2 others could finally pull him off, and he instantly calmed down. Story 10. My grandfather was a man who rarely talked and never rushed. He once had a completely silent argument with my significant other. They slammed the back door at each other until they broke the window in it. They said he was a steel worker who worked for a moving company on the weekends. He was short but built like a brick house. When I was very young, I don't remember what led up to it, but I remember my father making my grandmother cry. Then I remember my grandfather charging in like a bull, grabbing my father and pitching him across the house. My dad made a good decision and bolted as soon as he got up. That was the only time I saw my grandpa lose his temper. Story 11. My grandfather is a nice, funny, flirty guy. Was an exec at a manufacturing business after being the 3rd employee. Everyone gets along with him, and he was fairly well off in my small town. One day my cousin and I are helping him with some work. We go to the store. There's a lot of poverty in my hometown and one of the poorer families was at the store. My cousin makes some comment. He was kind of a shit at this point, about them being poor in what they were doing at the store because they couldn't buy anything or something along those lines. My nice grandfather grabs him and slams him against a wall and says, "Nothing in your life makes you better than them. Right now, I'd rather have them buy me than you." He then makes my cousin apologize and my grandfather announces my cousin will pay for whatever they're getting. He makes my cousin work off the expenses for him to prove a lesson. Now that cousin is a stand-up social worker specializing in poverty, abuse, and rehabilitation. The only time I have ever seen my grandfather be aggressive. Story 12. I was bullied in school. Not as bad as most, but it still happened. 2 cases come to mind. The judo champion of our school was one of the biggest culprits for picking on me. One time we were heading up the stairs to our French class on the top floor. He grabs me in a bear hug from behind, locking my arms to my side. The only course of action left to me was to throw my head back, cracking him on the bridge of the nose. Another time, he put a plastic bag over my head, a thin one. I think it mostly ripped just by him trying to force it onto my unwilling head. It was only after I pushed him into a corner of a table that he stopped. In both cases, violence was the only option open to me, and in both cases, it prevented that situation from happening again. Both these incidents were just the final times this happened. The bear hug going up the stairs was a particularly favorite trick of his. I'd spoken to teachers about him and others, but it was just blown off. I guess because the biggest bullies in my year were most of the fucking prefects, with the head boy being the ringleader, but because it was all their word against mine. Story 13. My uncle is the most peaceful person I know. He is essentially a living version of what would happen if you combine General Iroh, Bob Ross, and Dr. Dolittle. He keeps a garden, feeds wild birds out of the palm of his hand, has been known to just walk up to a deer without it running away. I've never heard him raise his voice except to talk to someone really far away in my entire life. He was in the military during Vietnam, not sure what branch. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. The war ends, he goes home and returns to his normal life working at a tire factory. One night, he's going off a hard day at work and wants a drink, so he goes to the local bar. 3 guys are standing outside talking amongst themselves, and he goes to walk in, but they stop him. He tells them he doesn't want any trouble. He's just had a stressful day at work and wants to grab a drink. They go back and forth for a while, and eventually he just pushes past them to get in. They didn't like that and pulled him back, where he proceeded to knock one unconscious and floor another. The third backed off and let him inside. By the time he left, they were nowhere to be seen. Story 14. I knew a girl who was living with a guy who had a severe anger management issue. He had kept it under control for the few years they lived together, but one day he snapped over some minor issue, hit her repeatedly, banged her face in the concrete, and tried to choke her until a passerby stopped him. So the relationship was over. She was going to fetch her stuff from the apartment. She likewise obviously didn't want to go alone, so 2 other friends and her brother, who I also knew, tagged along to keep things in check and to help carry stuff. When we arrive, her ex gives us an attitude, which causes her normally extremely mild and docile brother to snap completely. He smacked the guy up against the wall with one hand and punched him repeatedly with the other, holding him up against the wall the entire time, because you don't hit someone who is down. We just stood there in shock and awe. Given the way the girl looked after the beating she had received, black and blue, bruised, her entire face scraped, choke marks around the neck and so on, we didn't much mind about what was going on and just let him punch him out. Then we got our stuff and left as he started to wake up. 2 times during the following months, the ex was jumped twice when moving outdoors in the evening. I don't know who did it, and I don't want to know. I guess everybody has their trigger. Story 15. Greg versus Jimmy. This one guy who was in our year at school was gigantic. We'll say his name was Greg. Greg hit 6 feet tall at the age of 15 and had a beard coming in a few years before that. He was intimidating as hell, but he was the nicest guy you'd ever meet. I still have a ton of time for him all these years later. Genuine model of a good person. Anyway, he was being teased all year by this asshole of a boy. Let's call him Jimmy. Jimmy had some self-esteem issues and used to pick on younger kids constantly. But when he set his sights on gentle Greg, knowing he wouldn't retaliate, it got interesting. Jimmy was rarely in school, but would still hang about the school gates with about 6 or 7 pals waiting for Greg to appear, and bolt when they finally did. One weekend, we were all out street drinking, as you do, and Jimmy and company jumped Greg. Greg went mental. A couple of Jimmy's pals held us back while Greg managed to knock out 4 of the guys clean out before they brought him down. It was like watching the Hulk fight. Jimmy obviously bolted before the actual fight began. The next Monday at school, he was back to his usual self again, or so it seemed. I didn't witness the next part myself, but I wish I did. Greg hit Jimmy with an uppercut so forceful that he was launched across his school desk and was advised to leave education. Justice. Story 16. My father-in-law is such a patient man. He's quiet, reserved, and has a great sense of humor, when my mother-in-law lets him get any words in anyway. My mother-in-law talks a lot. She'll ask you questions, and when you start to answer, she talks over you and tries to answer them herself. It's infuriating and obnoxious. One time she asked me a question and I started to answer her, and she cut me off to basically finish my answer for me, and starts to ask another question. Lather, rinse, and repeat for about 4 questions. Finally, my patient, quiet, laid-back father-in-law just explodes on her, basically screaming at her. "Mother-in-law, oh my god! Let her actually answer the question you asked. Stop interrupting. You never let anyone finish their thought." It was glorious, and I almost tackled him to hug him. She still does it, but that day was amazing. Story 17. My dad was a career Army officer. I've always known him as a soft-spoken, kind, never gets angry kind of person. He rarely ever raises his voice that I know of. There is a law in the US that basically protects any service member nearing 20 years from being forced out so they can get full retirement benefits. One day he gets a call from his commanding general telling him that he's going to be forced out due to budget cuts army-wide. He got up out of his seat and started yelling at the general on the phone that it was impossible due to the law since he was in the safe zone. He started quoting section after section, yelling at the general, telling him he had fucked up and that it better be fixed. A few days later, my dad got a call again from the general, and the first thing the general said was, "Before you say anything, let me apologize for the other day. You were 100% correct. But budget cuts are budget cuts, and as soon as my dad hit 20 years, he was retired." Story 18. When I was in elementary school, I was being bullied at recess, and the teacher or monitor wasn't doing anything about it. My dad didn't work a traditional office job. He made his own schedule, which let him have a lot of flexibility. After getting the runaround at the school, he was referred to some bureaucrat at the district offices. Well, this guy did not want to meet my father, so despite my dad making an appointment, he wasn't in that day. Fun fact, that excuse doesn't work very well when you have labeled dedicated parking spots. The appointment was at 2 p.m., so my dad blocked the car in, rolled down the windows, pulled out a book, and started reading. At around 7 p.m., he hears the cough of a man who wants to get someone's attention while not being obvious about it. Oh, look at that. The bureaucrat showed up at the office and is ready for his 2 p.m. appointment. Story 19. My father, who had a legendary temper and never lost it in front of me, was sued for malpractice by this insane patient, the epitome of an ambulance-chasing lawyer. We were in the car and we saw the lawyer, and my father said, very evenly, although boiling with rage, "If you weren't in this car, I'd crash right into that piece of shit motherfucker." Even today, 40 years later, I believe he would have done it. That was scary. Story 20. My little brothers are twins, fraternal. Matthew is emotional, high-strung, and always getting himself in trouble because he can't keep his mouth shut. Philip is the exact opposite. Very calm, very rational, very quiet. At the time of this story, they were about 10. We lived across the street from the elementary school and I was out of school, so I'd often chill on the front porch with a book and keep an eye on the kids across the street. One day, I hear Matthew's voice start to spin up. I look up and he's facing down some kid, red in the face and about a step from swinging or crying. I'm not sure which. I get up and start to head over, and I've just stepped onto the grass across the street when Matthew's antagonizer says, quite clearly, "Your birth certificate was an apology letter from the abortion clinic." The twins know what an abortion is. Matthew goes silent, shocked and hurt, and tears start to well up in his eyes. I'm furious, and a teeny part of me is laughing because holy shit, the one was new. But before I can say anything, here comes Philip, with a flying punch straight to the side of the kid's head. Knocked him right on his ass. Matthew was shocked out of his tears. I'm flabbergasted over watching a 10-year-old perform an absolutely beautiful airborne sucker punch. Philip stands over the kid, practically snarling until I make it up to them. The kid sees Philip is distracted by me walking up and takes off. I march the twins back home. "I'm kinda proud of you, dude," I tell Philip. "Sticking up for your brother like that?" Philip gives me the flattest look I've ever seen on a child. "I wasn't protecting him," he says. "That's my birth certificate too." Story 21. Twice in 20 years I've seen the fury of my very patient, docile, and kind stepdad. The first time was when some 12th graders chased my brother and cousin all the way from school to our backyard, threatening their lives with pocket knives. Stepdad calmly walked to the backyard, grabbed the big kids by their throats, and lifted them, pinning them to the fence. "Stay the hell away from my kids," was all he said, in a calm, teeth-biting kind of way. The kids booked it faster than I've ever seen anyone run, and never bugged my brother or cousin again. Then we all went inside and made burgers. The second time was in my angsty preteen years when I called my mother a bitch. He turned at me and I'd never been so scared in my life. This time he was right pissed and screamed at me until I was backed up against our bar counter, shielding myself with the bar stool legs. The second he backed off slightly, I booked it into my bedroom and barricaded myself in with all the furniture I could find. Didn't come out for a solid day until I got up the courage to apologize. But he's a teddy bear normally. Story 22. My dad, about a decade ago while I was in high school, we lived on a hill, and if you go down the hill, it leads into the main part of town where all the shops and stuff are. And if you go up, over the other side, it's where a lot of the bars and clubs are. It's quicker to go over than around, obviously. But then my parents each had a car instead of sharing one and only one space in the garage, and drunk idiots were constantly damaging Mom's car. Well, one night Dad happened to have a day off fall on the weekend, and he could hear a group of drunk people walking up the road. His little office or computer room is at the very front of the house, so he gets up, goes out the front door, and just waits near the front lawn, watching. They're being loud and pushing each other around. Mom's worried as fuck and comes to get me because she doesn't want him to get hurt by some drunk idiot, and I go out to see what he's doing. They end up pushing each other around more, and one bump into the car or is leaning on it, the hood of the car. Dad tells them to get away from it. They start taunting him, so he walks closer toward them, and one of the little bastards cleanly smashes the side mirror off while laughing at him. Dad is a 6-foot ex-basketballer, basically just all-around fucking huge, and is a small man bait in a normal day. Dad hit him straight in the jaw, and you could see his jaw completely broken. Guy's immediately screaming and bawling his eyes out at the same time, while his friends pick him up and run away. Never heard from them again, or got any trouble for it. Dad just went back inside and watched TV. Yeah, let's break the mirror off the 6'8" guy's car. Sounds like a good idea.
What's one comeback you've used in life that was so smooth you still grin when you think back on it? Story 1. Mine was during a breakup argument. In her fit of anger, she shouted at me, "I faked every single orgasm I had with you." To which I replied, "I was too busy enjoying my own to notice." The look of rage in her face at that was worth having her throw my PlayStation at me. Story 2. I was at a comedy club and got up to use the bathroom, which was directly behind the stage. As I walked back to my table, the comedian on stage waved at the curtain behind him and said, "You know, behind this curtain is a one-way mirror. We were all watching you in there." In an uncharacteristic moment of confidence and wit, I turned to him and said, "Yes, I heard the applause." Story 3. I am usually a sap, sad and pathetic, but I was sitting in a coffee shop with some friends, plus a few people I didn't know. The girls in the group started talking about the types of guys they're into. This girl I just met said, "I don't know what it is, but I really love when guys are dicks to me." Before she could finish her next sentence, I say, "Holy shit, are you still talking?" Everyone looked at me like in complete shock, but the girl gave me a grin of approval. Story 4. I was conversing with a friend about video games in the school cafeteria when a loud, overweight girl started loudly talking about how all guys who play video games are nerds. I shoot her a look and say, "I guess I'm a nerd," then she rolls her eyes and says, "Tell me something I don't know, freak." Off the top of my head, I reply, "Salad tastes good." Story 5. I was at a bar at a table with some friends. A group of women who looked to be in their early 50s sitting at a nearby table completely hammered, which normally wouldn't be an issue. Only these ladies were literally gutting younger women with insults as they'd pass by, trying to see how many they could make cry. After about an hour or so of this happening, these women start looking for men to take home. I know this because they were nice enough to announce it out loud to the entire bar every few minutes. One of the women, a blonde that happened to be the ringleader of this group, kept looking over at me, trying to capture my attention. Not being overly attracted to obnoxious, I ignore this woman, which only makes it worse, and only makes her angry. So she gets up and walks over to our table, tells me that she's going to the bathroom and that I better be there when she returns, because I'm going home with her. To which I say, "It's not happening," but she ignores me and makes her way to the bathroom. On her way back, she walks past me and loudly exclaims, "Dick," so everyone at her table and my table can hear. To which I respond, "Oh mom, you know how you get after 2 drinks?" She turned around and I've rarely seen a woman so pissed off. She started screaming something I couldn't make out, which attracted the bouncer who promptly kicked her out. Everyone clapped, and I drank the rest of the night for free. Story 6. I was a witness to a murder in which I was one of the people they tried to kill. Years later after it happened, I get a call. I needed to testify as they had caught the assholes. After several minutes of questioning, the DA asked me what I was thinking after they shot at me. Thinking to myself how you answer a blatantly obvious and ridiculous question, the only response I could come up with was, "Shit." The entire court started laughing, including not only every juror, but the DA, the defense attorney, and the judge. Even the stenographer was laughing so hard that she stopped typing. I'm fairly certain I'll never get another zinger like that again. Story 7. I used to work at this pizza joint that would stay open late on the weekends to hit the bar crowd. The pizza was New York style, so the 18-inch pie was standard and the slices were as big as your face. A pair of guys came in and ordered a slice, each of the meat lovers pizza, which came out to like $4.75 a slice. Now I get it that one might find this pizza to be pricey, but the number of toppings we put on it made up for that, or so I thought. These guys began throwing a fit about it, and we defended ourselves saying that we didn't set the prices, and we're sorry, but that's how it is. We have to eat too. One of the guys looks at my coworker, who is a big overweight, and goes, "Well, you look like you're eating well." pays for the slice, and sits down to eat it. 5 minutes later, I walk out with a slice for a different customer who asked to have his slice warmed in the oven, and as I turn around to go back behind the counter, those two guys are standing right in front of me and getting all up in my face. The one guy from before goes, "You gonna leave a garbage on the table for yo ass to clean up, cause your piece is too expensive." I looked him right in the eyes and said, "You come rolling in here wearing your Dolce & Gabbana bullshit sunglasses, ready to pay $8 for a shot of pucker, and you're going to complain about $5 pizza? Man, get the fuck out of my restaurant." As I said that, the guy looks around the whole restaurant that is now staring at us and starts doing the whole bullshit, and I go, "What the fuck is your problem? You got a fucking leak, asshole? Get the fuck out." And all of a sudden, the whole restaurant erupted into a bunch of, "Ooh, damn, shit," and people were clapping. It was amazing. The owner always told the guys running the bar shift that they could say and do whatever they needed to in order to get someone to leave that was being rude or disorderly to the staff. They took that privilege very seriously. Story 8. Had about 13 shots of tequila at my mother's birthday party. A man that was interested in her showed up. He was the stereotypical redneck, very narrow-minded, conservative Republican, judgmental, stubbornly and willfully ignorant, falsely quoted the Bible, etc. Anyway, he made the mistake of talking to me. He kept boasting about how he's a proud redneck, but tried to tell me that there were classy rednecks and trashy breeds. My response was, "Oh, I wonder what's the difference between the two. Do the classy rednecks frame their Confederate flags instead of using them as curtains?" It was a fantastic night. I'm normally a very polite girl. Story 9. I was in middle school. This one guy, let's call him Ben, was bullying the fat kid in my grade in the locker room after our gym period, while everyone was changing. Let's call the chubby guy Chris. What was strange was this bully was smaller than Chris, but still managed to push him around and make him feel like shit. At one point, he cornered Chris and just kept acting like he was about to take a swing at him, just waiting for Chris to wince or flinch. I was really annoyed at how little of a fuck everyone was giving about this, so I went to the bully who was my size and just pushed him against the wall. He punched me on my arm and just said, "F off, Hindu guru. Your mother is a cunt." Honestly, I don't know how I thought of this, but I almost immediately responded by saying, "Tell your mom to stop changing her lipstick. My dick is turning rainbow." Because we were in middle school, everyone just went, "Ooh." Ben just shut his ass up and went back to his locker. Haven't had a smooth comeback since. Story 10. My stepdad was having a Christmas dinner party a few years back from the law firm at the house. One of my stepdad's friends had just been talking shit all night. Little comments here and there about me. You could call it teasing. At first, I brushed it off because he was drunk, but it got to me after a while. Anyway, we're all eating at the table and is sitting across from me. His date is at the end of the table to the right of me. Everyone was talking, and somehow, the conversation steered towards me about making it a long-distance thing with my girl, because I was moving for college. So the dude starts talking shit, saying something along the lines of, "You're so young to be p***y-whipped. When I was your age, I had all sorts of fun, but now I'm old, blah blah blah." It was almost awkward. Then the date gently grabs his bicep and says, "It's okay. I like my men how I like my wine." And me, without skipping a beat, "You like them extra fruity?" The whole dinner table, like 15 of us, just started laughing hysterically. The guy got mad. He was like, "Why would you call me that?" And I sarcastically said, "I don't know. Why would I call you that?" The dude was very eccentric and a bit flamboyant, so it just bothered him, I guess. So he demanded I answered him. And I was like, "Chill out, man." So he got more upset and demanded I answer him or else. So I stood up and I was like, "Or else what?" He stands up and I fake punch his ass. He totally flinched. So my stepdad starts laughing and tells him to calm down before he gets his panties all up in a bunch. The dude stormed off outside. He was totally embarrassed. They still make fun of him to this day about how he got punked by a high school kid. The truth is, I'm usually pretty quick on my feet, but I at least think about what I'm going to say. This one just spat out my mouth. I didn't even realize I said it. It's like, that's what she said. I just say it after anything naturally. It just so happened that it was a perfect setup for what seems to be a sensitive subject for that dude. Every time I think about it, all I see is success baby in my head. Story 11. Not mine, but my sister's. She was about 4 and we wanted to play kitchen in her room. She grabbed some cereal boxes from the kitchen and put them in her room. My mother, in trying to explain why it wasn't acceptable, said, "The cereal will bring ants. Do you want ants in your room?" My sister, not missing a beat, replied, "Do you want ants in your kitchen?" This story still gets brought up at family gatherings 20 plus years later. Story 12. I'm getting ready to leave the happy hour and see that my coat is still on the bar stool that I was at earlier, but now is being sat on by the CEO. And my bag is on the bar next to him. So I walk over and somewhat sheepishly, I was pretty low in the totem pole, say, "Excuse me, to get my coat, and when I go to grab my bag, he grabs it and says, winking at the CFO, "It's cool. We've already been through your bag. There's no money in there." Without even thinking, I said, "Yeah, we're going to have a talk about that." They burst out laughing, and after that, I was cool with the CEO. True story. Story 13. I was a store manager at Electronics Boutique a long time ago, and a customer brings us a controller that a dog had chewed through the cord. He bought it the previous day and he wanted his money back. I wouldn't do it. And my employees look at him and said, "We can't refund this. You didn't buy a wireless controller." This guy is swearing out loud about us, and it's during a really busy time. He threw the controller at my employee and I tell him to leave. He gets right up in front of my face and said, "Fuck you." I looked him in the eyes and replied, "Fuck me? No, fuck you. Get the fuck out of my store." He looked stunned and left. Story 14. I was on a plane flight from LAX, LA International Airport, to New Zealand. I was sitting next to a Chinese woman who within the first 5 minutes of conversation started extolling the virtues of the Chinese capital punishment system. Conviction, execution, family billed for the bullet the same day. I told her I was against the death penalty, but that at least in most countries in the West, the systems had multiple appeals to satisfy the principle of better to let 100 murderers go free than execute one innocent man. She told me that in China it was better to execute 100 innocent men than let one murderer go free. We still had the whole Pacific to go, so I said, "Let's agree to disagree and that should make for a more peaceful flight," and then sat in my seat and seethed about this for the next 12 hours. 3 movies, 2 meals, and a long sleep later we're landing in Wellington, and the customs announcements prompt the Chinese lady to start telling our row this long story about how she was detained in Bangkok, suspected of being a drug mule, had her very private things in her suitcase spread out on a table. She was visibly upset at this story and looked to be tearing up as she started to describe them searching her person for drugs. The fasten seatbelt light went off. I said, "Better to have strip searched you and 99 other innocent passengers than let one drug smuggler get through." And then I got up, grabbed my bag, and walked away, leaving her open-mouthed. To this day, when I come back, her witty retort occurs to me after the fact. I always remember this story and think, it's okay, I got her. Story 15. I was at a bar shortly after reading all about pickup artists and their games and how to unlock panties and gain vaginas. A greasy Jersey Shore type dude with a backward hat and a popped sequin collar shows up, sits 2 inches away from me and asks, "Hey, I and my buddy are settling an argument. Who lies more, men or women?" I recognized it immediately as a pickup artist canned line, and without missing a beat said something like, "Dudes who lie to themselves by thinking that using canned lines from pickup books will attract sex." The guy sat there dumbfounded and said, "That wasn't a line, no joke," and then touched my shoulder in the textbook Kino bullshit I had just read about. I felt bad about being a jerk to him, so I pointed him to the nearby attractive cougar who was sitting ferociously in the corner with a brutally olive-spiked martini, ready to pounce on any live prey who wandered past. I said something like, "If you want to get laid, that lady over there is hungry, but everyone is scared of her. Go and talk to her." Again, dumbfounded, he blinked a few times, said thanks, and wandered over to the beautiful, salacious cougar. They departed shortly after. I did this all while drunk, and I'm not nearly this smooth in real life. God damn it. Story 16. Not quite a comeback, but when I was a senior in high school, our football stadium was renovated and a jumbotron was added to one end zone. We were one of the only high schools in the state to have one. I went to what everyone thought of as the rich high school, so friends and acquaintances from rivaling high schools around the city would chide us about the jumbotron to no end. Fast forward to basketball season and an away game across town at a fairly big basketball complex that acted as the home court for 3 or 4 schools in the city. After one particularly flashy fast break and dunk, the entire arena went oddly silent after we finished cheering for our team, and I shouted, "I want to see that again! Where's your jumbotron?" It was met with lots of angry oohs and a smattering of boos from the other side of the arena, as well as a stern look from one of our vice principals that eventually cracked into a smile and full-blown laughter. Dude, if your school could afford a jumbotron, then it was pretty rich. Story 17. I don't have any of my own, but I can tell you a couple that I heard other people make. Don and Vern were 2 coworkers, both nearing retirement age, who liked to tease each other about getting old. One day, Vern was walking around the office with his fly open until Don pointed it out to him, and then he zipped up. Vern quipped, "Well, you know what they say, it pays to advertise." Don answered, "What are you advertising? A going out of business sale?" Another one. John and Artie were 2 physics students. John had spent a lot of time setting up an experiment, which then went wrong somehow. John was moaning, "Why does this always happen to me?" "Maybe it's because you're stupid," said Artie. Artie always tried to make some wise remark, although he usually wasn't very clever. John was used to this. He weakly protested, "Artie, that was a rhetorical question. It doesn't require an answer." Artie replied, Well, that was a rhetorical answer. It doesn't require a question. Story 18. I was at my usual bar one Halloween waiting outside for a cab when a cocktail waitress, who was outside for a cigarette, got in my face and started spewing all sorts of abuse. Apparently, there was a case of mistaken identity and she had gotten word that I was messing around with her new boyfriend, who was a friend of mine. I wasn't. So I'm minding my business when she gets in my face, starts yelling and shoves me. There are 2 police officers standing nearby waiting to arrest some drunk drivers, but they don't look too concerned. I know that hitting her back is a bad plan, but I'm too drunk to formulate any coherent counter-argument. So I do the only thing I can think of. I grab her face with both my hands and give her a long, lingering kiss. "Jamie," I replied after breaking away. "You're a gem." She froze in shock for a solid 30 seconds and then ran back into the bar, screaming about how now she had to get tested for herpes. The cops behind me were dying laughing. I moved away the next day, and 4 years later, I've yet to see either her or her boyfriend again. Story 19. Not my own comeback. I am sadly not quick enough on my feet, but I will share with you the best comeback I ever had the pleasure to witness. I was working as a reporter in Oklahoma, and a pretty high-profile murder trial was wrapping up. It was early evening when the defense stood up to deliver the closing statement. The attorney started out by saying, "There's a John Wayne movie. I'm sorry I cannot remember the title at this point, but the point is, in this movie, John Wayne says, 'It's a terrible shame to kill a man.'" The attorney then goes on to state that while nobody is disputing that the defendant shot his former foster father in the face with a sawed-off shotgun, he feels really bad about it, and so he begs the court to show leniency on his client. The prosecution stands for final rebuttal, and the DA simply closes with, "Your Honor, members of the jury, the John Wayne movie is called Unforgiven." The jury was back with their verdict in less than 2 hours, and the defendant ended up getting 24 years at sentencing. Story 20. A few years ago, I was working at an eye doctor's place that sold glasses and contacts. We had some crazy deals going on at the time, and the lab was weeks behind, and we were constantly f***ing up people's glasses and just flat out forgetting to process specific orders. Well, one stressful evening nearing close, this long-haired Vietnam vet walks in and asks for his glasses. After searching for a half hour or so to no avail, one of the newer employees asks me to talk to him. I ask his name, and she says it's Mr. Brantman or something similar, so I walk over there and say, "Mr. Brantman, I apologize, but we haven't yet processed your glasses," and before I could finish, he cuts me off and goes, "No, not Brantman. My name is Grantman. Doesn't grant me a wish, man. And find my goddamn glasses." It froze for like 15 seconds or so, just blinking at the sky in disbelief before walking back into the lab and demanding that his glasses be processed immediately. I told the lab guys about how hard I got burned and they had his glasses ready in 20 minutes. He probably uses that line a lot, though. Story 21. I was a teenager and my father had just died a few days earlier. I went to a local youth drop-in center I frequented, and most people there knew what had happened already. I somehow got into a conversation with Tuan, who was very much a self-centered person at the time and seemed to just want to one-up me. The conversation pretty much went as follows. Me: "Man, I'm so tired today. Didn't get much sleep." Him: "Yeah, I've been sleeping horribly for the past week." Me: "Yeah, I hear that. I've just been kinda crappy lately." Him: "Oh man, I've been feeling the worst lately, you know? Like you've had no idea what it's like." Me: "Yeah, well, my dad just died." He looks at me, then looks around and sees other people's faces and knows I'm telling the truth. Oh. That was the end of the conversation.
What was the most epic comeuppance you've ever seen a spoiled kid get? Story 1. I worked at Taco Bell in high school. At the time, we had kids' meals. So this kid comes in with his parents and orders a kid's meal. Apparently, he had been in recently and already had that toy. He started screaming at me to get him another toy. His dad looked at me with an absolutely dejected look on his face and begged me to go get the toy. I dug through the new box of toys and found one. The kid ripped it out of my hands and ran outside, directly into a rose bush. My coworker was legit laying on the ground laughing. Story 2. Not incredibly epic, and not much of a comeuppance, but great nonetheless. I was on a flight from Washington Dulles to Heathrow. This 6 to 8-year-old kid behind me was screaming the whole overnight flight, constantly bitching at his mom for food, toys, what the hell, whatever. Mom was a "shh, no honey, shh, sweetheart" type. Finally, the mom had to get up to use the restroom. The kid starts wailing. The guy next to me leaned up over his seat, turned around and said, "Hey kid, shut the fuck up." The whole plane didn't clap, but we enjoyed 5 minutes of dead silence till mom came back. Story 3. I guess I'll start. Definitely not the best, but still pleased me. I used to work at a pony camp that catered to rich kids from a very nice neighborhood. We would have really spoiled kids all the time. While annoying, the most frustrating part is trying to maintain authority just so the little shits don't get themselves killed by 1,000-pound animals. Anyways, we had a maybe 10-year-old kid from some mildly famous sportscaster one week. The kid was just downright awful. She ignored everything we told her and was mean to the other kids in camp. At one point, she started a physical fight with another girl, and when she felt like she was getting beaten, she started yelling, "Do you know who my mom is? I'm going to tell her." The other kid got scared and started crying. My coworker replied, "Actually, I do know your mom, and I know she wouldn't like to hear about this. Why don't I call her right now?" The little brat didn't believe her, so my coworker did. She was much easier to deal with the rest of the week. Turns out my coworker worked with her mom many times over the years. She's a professional makeup artist for TV and did her makeup more than a few times. Suck it, spoiled brat. Story 4. I sort of had a "do you know who my mom, dad is" experience as well, but the much more low-key, not rich, just entitled. I substituted teaching a 10th grade English language arts class, and they were instructed to write an essay silently and told by their own teacher to not use their phones. Then she left for a meeting. Any phone usage was written up. Well, being the substitute teacher, there were quite a few students who ignored that rule and were testing me, and even though they were working, I found myself walking around reminding them to put away their phones and to stop talking, and they would stop. One particular student started making phone calls. I told him to put away his phone, and if I caught him doing that again, I would write him up. He then tells me point blank, "I am calling my mother. You probably don't know her, but she is a teacher here, and I am arranging to get my friend and me out of here so that I can work in a more peaceful location." I told him he's not going anywhere. The students become completely silent, stop working, and look at him and me as I write his name down. A woman walks by the room, and the kid acts up a bit. He starts saying, "That's my mom. I'm going to talk to her." I told him, "Stay in your seat." He does, but accuses me of not believing him. "You don't believe me? That's my mom. She's a teacher here." I never say I didn't believe him, but I took a chance, walked to this woman, and explained to her that her son was making phone calls in class, despite warnings when he should be in the middle of writing an essay. I added that he plans on leaving class and he was attempting to use his mother's status as a way out. She was indeed his mother, and she ripped him a new one right in front of his peers, and the students burst out laughing after she leaves. He accuses me of blowing it out of proportion. I told him to finish his essay. After that, the class was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and I found a comfortable seat by the window. I felt kind of bad about it because I know high school can be tough, so I talked to their teacher afterward. The teacher said he probably needed it. Turns out this particular kid did this a lot. The other students often called him out for using his mom for special privileges. He would ask his mom to write late passes so he could be excused almost daily. Story 7. This one was told to me by my parents since I was too young to remember at the time. The neighborhood bus stop for the Catholic high school was on the corner where our house sits. Sometimes when it was raining, the kids would wait right next door to our house for cover. That didn't bother my parents. They had kids and they didn't want somebody else's kids standing out in the rain. What did bother them was when they realized the kids started passing the time by ripping up all the flowers around the house. Parents called the school to complain and had a nice chat with the principal. That Saturday, all the kids who used that stop showed up to replant the flowers which they or their parents paid for. When the flowers were replanted, they got to spend a few more hours helping with our other yard work. Then the school moved its bus stop to the main road on the edge of the neighborhood. That meant about 2 more blocks of walking every day for most of them and waiting in a field with no shelter from bad weather. Story 8. There's actually a complete video of mine. Here at the University of Connecticut, they serve special mac and cheese on certain days. I'm sure lots of schools do it, but our bacon jalapeno mac is pretty damn good. Well, a certain sophomore from a wealthy family who was used to being bailed out of trouble by his rich parents got drunk and decided he wanted some mac and cheese. He was clearly intoxicated and had the balls to walk around the food court drinking beer. The manager sees this and won't let him in the food line. As seen in the video, our boy spends the next 10 minutes mercilessly berating the poor guy and his staff for being beneath him. The manager gives him so many chances to just walk away, but our boy isn't leaving without his mac. He shoves the manager, not for the first time, and another employee decides he's done with this shit. Hero employee tackles our boy and pins him. Shithead spends the next few minutes pinned to the ground while the cops arrive, screams, "I'm absolutely fucked," and is arrested. Not his first arrest, not his first expulsion from a college. From what I hear, he has also been arrested or expelled from another school. We'll never forget you, Mr. Mac and Cheese Kid. Story 9. Boy Scout camp out in Utah, when the Boy Scouts are pretty much run by the Mormon Church. A porcupine walked through our camp and this spoiled rich kid got a stick and chased it up a tree. We all told him to stop. He wouldn't listen. Scout leaders were off doing God knows what at the time. So this porcupine is up the tree, and now the spoiled weenie wants to shoot hard candy with his wrist rocket. He can't get a clear shot, so he climbs up the tree and sits on a branch under the porcupine, shoots a hard candy at the porcupine and hits it hard. It was right then that he learned that when a treed porcupine feels threatened, it just lets go and lets the quills break the fall. The big-ass porcupine fell right into the spoiled kid's shoulder, bounced off, hit his thigh, and then landed on the ground. It waddled away, and we just laughed at the now howling spoiled kid. One of the scout leaders had to drive the kid to an emergency room. I hope he caught hell for not supervising too. Story 10. On the first day of a 2-week vacation, I saw my spoiled 10-year-old cousin tell his mother, his older female cousin, his aunt, and his grandmother that he wasn't going to clear his place or rinse his dishes because that's women's work. For the rest of that 2-week vacation, nobody had to lift a finger to clear a plate, rinse a dish, or wash a pot because it was his job. At times, there were over a dozen of us there. Story 11. Used to work at a non-overnight summer camp school program and a week-long soccer camp. The town isn't huge, so needless to say, over a few years I got to know several kids from different programs. One 10-year-old boy I knew from after-school care was a total prick. Bully, snob, didn't think he had to listen, tattletale, personal pet peeve, just awful. He came to my soccer camp and proceeded to make fun of an 8-year-old girl because she had old cleats where he had the newest Nikes and a brand new cool design ball. Unfortunately for him, I also knew this 8-year-old girl and knew that the reason her cleats looked old and worn down was that she was a motherfucking beast, just all-around amazing athlete who loved soccer and played hours every day. I paired him with her for a simple drill where one person started with a ball and you just try to get past the other person and kick the ball at a stationary ball or cone about 10 yards away to simulate passing and scoring accurately while under pressure. He was of course angry, saying she was too young and a girl. I said if he hit the cone 3 times, he could pick his partner. He again pointed out her shoes to me as if that were going to change my mind before going in and playing. She proceeded to humiliate him over the next few minutes, not once letting him dribble past her in 5 attempts. He was livid, bending down, messing with laces as if the shoes really mattered, then saying he needed to use his ball. Nothing worked. He was so angry, I thought he was going to be violent, but then it was her turn to be on offense. He talked some kind of smack, I forgot what, and refused to let her use his ball. She didn't say a word and got a new ball. I blew a whistle and she did a step over fake, which made him move to the side she stood back up straight and kicked it between his legs and hit the cone. She barely even moved. He was so fucking angry. Second round, he charged her screaming, but she kept her cool and wound back like she was going to drill it at his dumb face. He ducked and squealed as she dribbled around him with his hand still covering his head and hit the cone. I didn't make her embarrass him for the remaining 3 attempts and called a water break. The kid was just dumbfounded. He honestly thought his shoes were going to make him better without any effort. He behaved better the rest of the week, but honestly, I think she just broke his spirit. He just seemed out of it. Hope he's doing all right. The girl is like an all-American high school soccer player last time I checked. I won't be surprised if I see her in the Olympics one day. Story 12. I was about 15. I was in the woods with some friends, local public nature reserve, playing on a rope swing, drinking energy drinks, eating snacks, chatting, and just having a good time keeping to ourselves, really. The rope swing itself was on a very tall tree, hanging over what I can only explain as a miniature valley, 2 small hills, a gap in the middle, rope swing on one side, but will reach the other side. Then some kids came along on their bikes, maybe 10 to 12, dressed up in tracksuits and quite mouthy, you know the type. They tell us then to move along from their rope swing, and it wasn't theirs. I set that thing up myself because I was like a Spider-Man kid back then. I could climb anything. Obviously, we said no, but we did say we'll leave them to it for a bit if they want to have a go. There's no reason we can't all enjoy it. They wouldn't take that answer, so we carried on playing on the rope swing, but then they began throwing sticks and rocks at us, which didn't faze us. Next thing, one of them tries to show off and speeds down the hill on his bike to try and grab me while I swing, but his mate throws a stick at the same time and it lodges in his wheel and sends him flying down the hill. To add insult to injury, he flies right in my swing path and gets 2 knees to the ribs. Completely took the wind out of him, and so they all left feeling defeated. It feels good because we did nothing out of order. The cards just worked in our favor. Story 13. I worked as an outdoor camp instructor. One week, I was on logistics and had to drive the van to pick up the kids. I had heard from my friend that one of the kids in his group was a little shit, back-chatting, lazy, and bullying other kids. When I got to the pickup point, the kids hopped into the van and my mate in the shotgun. My mate Mitch gave me the rundown of the kid. As I started the van up, I did a visual check of seatbelts and everyone was good, except for the kid. I asked and he said no. I told him I can't leave until he puts it on, so he did and I started to leave. A minute down the road, I heard him unclip his seatbelt again, so I had to stop the van and ask him again. He put it back on. This happened one more time. On the third time, I just pulled over and turned the van off, radioed base, and asked for my manager and the overseeing teacher who was his dean to come up and pick this kid up because he was a danger to the others in the van. That's when this kid started pleading and begging. Told him no, I already made the call. He got sent home, and my mate Mitch had one of the best weeks ever after this kid left. Story 14. Working at Chuck E. Cheese for 1 year. Some little kid keeps getting pissed because he can't win many tickets from a game. The kid begins to kick and scream, toss around, etc. I think he tries to hit one of the animatronics. When someone tried to get him to stop, he pulled the "Do you know who my dad is? Do you know what he can do to you?" We all just shook our heads and didn't know what to say. Was his dad the owner, rich, etc.? Tell me what I can do. We see this guy in a business suit just standing there with a really pissed off look on his face. It was the kind of face that you look at and wonder if this man never smiled. The kid just froze up and muttered something. The man apologized and walked away. He came back a few hours later and gave all the employees gifts. I got an Xbox 360, one of the first generation ones. I still have it with me if anyone wants a picture. He just gave me the console, no wires, controllers, or anything. Damn, he totally gave away the kid's stuff, huh? Story 15. We were poor growing up, like ham or cheese sandwich kind of poor. When I was 13, I asked my single mother to combine Christmas and birthday gifts, the birthday being in March. I had wanted a nice bike for years, but didn't want to ask for anything specific. I was happy with any gift. I asked very respectfully for a dyno comp bicycle. My awesome mom delivered, and in March, I got my favorite present of all time. Within 3 or 4 days, my best friend and his little brother, who of course were very well off, showed up at my house both with higher-end freestyle bikes. We went for a ride and the brothers ended up grazing each other and creating a scratch on the older brother's bike. He was furious and slammed his own bike on the ground, then knocked his little brother over and commenced stomping on both wheels. The younger brother returned the favor on the other bicycle. Then they actually had a contest to see who could destroy a bicycle more drastically. This was the first time I think my jaw dropped and I was just plain speechless. Once I regained my orientation, I just turned and pedaled away. I immediately started crying at why kids would trash brand new bicycles. They both showed up that weekend with 2 new bikes. I made up some lie and said I was grounded. I couldn't be friends with someone like that anymore. I just thought, my mom worked so hard for my bike and these guys destroyed $800 bikes. If my mom knew, I wouldn't even be allowed to be friends with them. Story 16. Mitch got everything he wanted. Granted, he was smart and ambitious, but was also petulant and snobby. The combination made him virtually hated by everyone. I liked him more than most people, and I hate him. Quote Al Franken on Ted Cruz. Our 3rd grade class would get Monopoly money for an auction of toys at the end of the year. If you were bad, you had to pay money, but if you were a little sycophant like Mitch, you were filthy rich. At the end of the year, Mitch surveyed all the toys and calculated how many brownie points it would take to swipe all the best stuff. One by one, Mitch swiped the best toys, always bidding perfectly. In the end, Mitch had enough for the most coveted toy on the table, the Chia Pet. Brent had the second most money and timidly started the bidding. Mitch toyed with him and gradually raised the price until Brent had to go all in. Mitch raised the bid by a small margin, and then Susan, who almost had a Nerf gun, gave her sizable pile to Brent and Brent raised. Mitch panicked and counted his money for a higher bid, but it was already too late. All the people he had screwed suddenly turned the auction into a popularity contest, and Brent delivered the final blow. Mitch freaked the fuck out and had the most satisfying meltdown. If he had just tried to get a few things, no one would have wanted to screw him, but by leaving so many people with so much worthless cash, he was truly hoisted by his own petard. F Mitch. Lol. Story 17. My neighbor down the street and his little brother were 2 of the most spoiled kids I'd ever met, and their mother was just horrible. For context, the younger brother's first word was shit. I wish I was lying, I really do. One day, the younger brother was having a vicious temper tantrum while I was over playing some GTA 3 with the older sibling. Unprovoked, he threw a pair of scissors that hit my elbow and I had to go to the hospital for a few stitches. His mother just yelled at him with a Newport hanging out of her mouth, which I felt wasn't sufficient justice. The next day, I went back, left my arm in a sling, and smashed that little in the face with a bucket. Story 18. I think I was around 9 or so, and I made friends with another kid down the road. It was his grandparents' place, and he visited a lot. If I remember correctly, we met through baseball. He was incredibly overweight and bossy. He always made the rules of the games we played and would throw major tantrums if I objected. For instance, while playing with action figures, I had the toy do some cool flips. He went crazy saying how it needed to be realistic. The first time I visited his house, I was blown away by the volume of toys he had. Growing up fairly poor, I was accustomed to having maybe one cool toy. He had all the PlayStation games and a huge collection of anime VHS. Not surprisingly, his parents were overweight as well and would make dense ass dinners that would take me 2 days to recover from. Eventually, during one sleepover, he wanted to play wrestle. Didn't take but a second to know how bad of an idea that is, him being 100 plus pounds. Especially since he wanted us to be shirtless. Huh? I refused and he cried, telling me to take my shirt off and to wrestle. I remember walking out and asking his mom for a ride home. She just gave me the look of, I understand. 2 days later, he shows up at my house asking for me to come out. My brother told him I wasn't home as I walked by the kitchen. He flipped his shit and that's the last I ever heard of him. I didn't know you were friends with Eric Cartman. Story 19. Not really a kid since the dude was in his 40s, but he acted like one. His mother paid for his life. Rent, bills, food, everything. He was super mean to her whenever she would call, and he had a crazy bad temper. I was homeless at the time, and my former boyfriend and I would come around his place sometimes. He would say the most fucked up shit to me. One time, he asked me if women were even human. Anyway, he always made a kind of point to throw money around casually and rip on us for being homeless, but then he'd be super shitty if any kind of exchange was made. For example, he asked my ex to install a new lock for him, agreed to pay him some bullshit lowball amount, and then never paid at all. The last day I saw him, he got pissed off about something and threw a keg at my ex's head. His place was full of music equipment he never used. Guitars, drums, amps, soundboards, all kinds of expensive stuff. My ex dodged the keg and it flew and hit a bunch of equipment. The dude proceeded to completely trash all of his own stuff in a man-toddler rage. As we left, he followed us down the street screaming obscenities and threatening to kill me. I didn't get to witness this myself, unfortunately, but he apparently got arrested because he mouthed off to a cop and told her he owns the LAPD and that she could arrest him later, but he was busy right then. I actually know this officer and I wish I could have seen her face when he said all of that. Suffice it to say, she wasn't having that shit and took him to jail. I heard that when he got out some months later, he'd been kicked out of his place and all his stuff was gone. Pretty sure he's homeless now.
What is the best get stuffed Karen experience you've had? I used to have a coworker who was strange. We used to go to the same barbecue joint every Friday, and without fail, my coworker would order a wagon, no wheel. The person working the register, usually someone different every week, never knew what he was talking about. So he'd have to explain that he wanted a chuck wagon sandwich with no bun. We went through this every week for probably a year. One day a new soda dispenser had been installed, and the guy was looking it over as we got our drinks. The guy asked us how we liked the dispenser. We told him that it was nice, and he thanked us, explaining that he was the owner of the place. My coworker immediately started ranting about how he needed to hire smarter people to work the register. The owner wanted to know more, and my coworker explained that they never knew what a wagon no wheel was. The manager asked, "What is a wagon no wheel?" My coworker explained. "Jesus Christ," exclaimed the owner. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What kind of idiot thinks he can make up names for things that aren't on the menu?" Then he looked my coworker in the face and asked, "Are you some kind of moron, pal?" My coworker stammered that he wasn't, and the owner said, "And quit saying stupid things to my staff. Order off the menu or get out." We ate our lunches, and my coworker never ordered a wagon no wheel again. I literally went and looked it up. A wagon wheel is a type of sandwich, and it's absolutely not even the right kind of sandwich. He'd be eating what I called a meat cookie when I was a little kid. Story 2. Worked at a pizza shop as a delivery driver when I was younger. The shop was owned by 3 extremely polite, professional, and hardworking Russian men, 2 brothers and a cousin. I took a delivery right down the street. I'm talking a tenth of a mile. Guy comes out hot about how they shouldn't have someone with such a heavy accent taking orders because nobody can understand what he's saying, and he just wants his order correct. I let him know that I'll pass on the message. I go back and tell the owner who took the order about this guy's complaint. The owner immediately calls him, tells him that if he doesn't like the way he speaks, he can go order from somewhere else since he was too lazy to drive 30 seconds to place the order in person. He ended it with, "Do you understand my English now?" Story 3. About 25 years ago, at an expensive steakhouse restaurant in Dallas, a couple of middle-aged ladies were led to their table by a young waiter. The place was surprisingly almost empty at the time. A few minutes after eyeing the menu, the waiter approached them to ask if they'd be ready to order. I didn't know what led to a sudden yelling from one of the ladies, but it ended with the waiter leaving while saying something along the lines of, "I don't have to put up with your attitude," in a polite way. Not even a minute later, a tall, older man with a perfectly trimmed white beard and magnificently dressed in a cowboy outfit, with a hat included, approached the table to ask about the encounter. That guy looked like he meant business. His demeanor and the way he carried himself showed authority. He didn't need to speak to make himself present. He was the owner. He approached the table and immediately went into a squat position to be at the same eye level as these ladies, as if he was sitting down. Shortly after a small and quiet conversation, he stood up with authority but without breaking eye contact. I was probably about 20 feet away, but until today, I vividly remember hearing the man say, "I'm going to bring the waiter back, and you will apologize to him, loud and publicly, just like you were berating him. If you decide not to do this, I will forcibly remove you myself from the premises." Everyone, including me and my entire table, stopped in their tracks and turned around. It just felt like a good old Western cowboy duel was about to go down. The lady couldn't believe this man was siding with a waiter. And even worse, everyone else was watching what she'd do next. With a defeated and angry face, the lady slammed the towel napkin on the table and said, "Fine, bring him back," as if trying to keep some sort of dignity. The waiter came back and the lady complied. At no point did the waiter show any sense of pride or being haughty. The apology was accepted and the business continued as usual. Story 4. I had to press on my brakes one time at a crosswalk because a family started to walk across that I didn't see on the sidewalk, obscured by a bush. The family didn't even react to my tires screeching because I stopped well before they were on the road. The woman behind me saw how hard I braked. And after the crosswalk, she drove next to me and was yelling out her window and pointing her finger at me while she was driving. Then she had an accident with a car in front of her as we came up to a stop sign because she was so busy yelling and looking at me in the lane next to her, instead of ahead of her at the stopped car. Story 5. I once worked as a barista at a coffee shop, and there was this one woman who was constantly rude to me. Once 2020 started after the confinements were lifted, my boss had to step up and help around as there were almost no other workers besides me. He realized how rude customers could be, as he was just managing the coffee shop and not actually dealing with people. At one point, while he was complaining to me about some rude customers, I told him about this woman and how she acted towards me. I asked if he could refuse her service. He just went, "Yeah, sure, go ahead. If she has a problem, just send her here." So the next day when she arrived and demanded her usual, I just went, "Nah, I'm not giving you anything anymore," and sent her towards my boss as she started to curse at me, knowing full well he's got my back this time and she's not going to get anything. By the way, that was the only coffee shop in the mall, and she was passing there every day. You had to walk a bit outside if you wanted a machine-made coffee. Story 6. We were at Disney World for a club trip back in high school. Me, my brother, and some friends were waiting in line at Space Mountain. My brother got separated very briefly. We're talking a minute, getting distracted by something in the ride queue. My brother tries to get back in line with us. Only like 2 families got between us in this time frame. This guy directly behind us is not having it. He starts pushing my brother back and won't let him get back with us. We were like, "Dude, he was briefly looking at something and is with us. He's been in front of you this entire time." The guy's insistent that he can't get back in his spot in line and is pushing my brother back. The cast member just happens to be walking by, and we told him the guy behind us was putting his hands on him. The guy was ushered out of line immediately. Lol. His family was unfazed by the whole thing and stayed in line. Story 7. I was in line, about the 4th person back, and this old lady was holding up the line at a Bed Bath & Beyond because she had a bunch of coupons that were expired and was demanding that they give them to her. Not recently expired, like expired over a year ago. And she said she didn't notice. Guy behind her with a thick New England accent does this. "Guy, just show him your special privileges card." Old lady, "I don't have a special privileges card." Guy, "Well, don't you have one?" Old lady, "I don't know." Guy, "Do you think that's because you don't have special privileges?" Old lady, blank stare. Everyone else in line just started busting out laughing. When the lady finally figured out that the guy behind her insulted her and there wasn't anything she could do about it, she just walked out. Guy proceeds to put his stuff down and the cashier told him that she was going to give him 50% off on the sheet set he was buying. Dude was a legend. I'm going to use this at some point. Best smart insult ever. Story 8. There was a male Karen. He would constantly call us and berate us for perceived issues with network speed. It wasn't us, it was his equipment. Then he escalated to pretending to CC newspapers and support emails. But since he was incompetent, they were invalid. One day my boss sees one of these emails and they get into a brief back and forth with him, telling him to stop being rude to staff. Finally, my boss just sends a final message. Your account is 45 pounds every 3 months. We do not need your business, and so have canceled your contract. Good riddance. He copied the entire support team in that one, and there was a cheer in the office. I miss working for that guy. He was one of the best bosses I've ever had. Story 9. About 25 years ago, I worked in a family-owned sub shop. A very hammered guy came in and rudely demanded half an Italian. He didn't specify anything more, and eventually, after some back and forth, it kind of seemed like he was asking for a cold piece. So we made it and gave it to him, and he paid for it. The guy could barely keep his eyes open. He was so plastered, but it didn't stop him from being loud, aggressive, and belligerent about everything. He had some history as an annoying customer, but it had never been anything this bad. Anyway, he pays for the food and then slides over at the front counter about 2 feet from the register. The person behind him steps up and starts trying to order food. But while this is going on, the guy very sloppily opens up his sub at the counter, deconstructs a sandwich, flapping his hands around angrily, tossing lettuce and tomato all over the place, including onto the other customer, and starts saying something like, "This isn't what I ordered. I want a half Italian." Like mid-sentence, the owner vaults over the counter and throws him out. The whole thing took 10 seconds and he was back finishing taking the next customer's order. It was like when Uncle Phil would throw Jazz out of the Banks house in Fresh Prince. It was glorious. Hammer Dude never came back. Story 10. When I worked retail, I was the guy that would go outside and bring the shopping carts in. One particularly busy day as I'm bringing a round of carts in, I notice a little woman in her mid-40s or so standing next to the area where the shopping carts are stored. I didn't really think anything of it and just started putting the carts away. Without moving, she yells at me, from about 30 feet away, standing next to multiple available carts, to bring her a cart. I figured I must have misheard her since she was standing next to so many available carts, so I just looked at her and waved. She looks shocked, yells, "Bring me a cart right now!" and snaps her fingers at me. I laughed at her and walked back outside to get more carts, and she immediately filed a complaint about a very rude car boy. Lol. Story 11. I worked security at a factory. The security company was contracted and not part of the factory. The third shift foreman was a son-in-law to the big boss and was a real pain. We'd park in a fire zone right by the building. I wrote it up in my daily reports for a few nights. He finally stopped me one night. He basically told me he was the son-in-law of Mr. Big and he could park as he pleased, and if I wanted to keep my job, I had better stop writing him up. Okay. The next night, my supervisor comes by for inspection and sees the car parked in the fire zone. She asks why I didn't write it up, so I tell her the story. She gets on me and says to write it up every time. So now I'm stuck between the third shift and my supervisor. The third in charge of the factory also oversaw security, and he was great. He would always stop and talk to us. That evening, he came in to get something, and he asked me how things were going. So I told him about my problem. He listens, then tells me that I should write it up every time I see it. Then he grinned and added, "But don't worry, after tomorrow you won't see it again." The third shift would not speak to me after that night, and I never heard a word about the parking. Story 12. When I worked at a McDonald's and a Walmart in the 90s, people would regularly leave mostly finished food on the table as part of a scam. They would often come back to a clean table and demand an entirely new order for free. We usually just refuse, and that was that. Anyway, one time a Karen left some fries and a half-eaten nugget on the table. She took her drink with her and left to go shopping. We cleaned the table, and like 10 minutes later, she came back irate, screaming at us for throwing away her food and demanding a new meal. She was waving her arms, screaming, threatening to tell the owner how useless we were. A coworker of mine said, "Yeah? Tell him, for $3.25 an hour, I'm the best he's gonna get. Get out." She grabbed her cart and left. Story 13. I worked at a local grocery store for about 7 months. It was my first job ever, and the only reason I left is because I was finally moving in with my grandma. It was about, I want to say, my third to last day. It was just about 10 p.m. I was training one of the new hires. She was doing really well that night. She was going through the motions as though she had worked there her entire life. I was only really giving her product codes and helping out when the system decided to not work. Eventually, this lady comes through with her groceries for the week. The new hire, who I'll call Jane, asked her for a loyalty number and went through the whole chit-chat questions. This customer was giving bland answers in that tone of voice where you know she sees you as nothing but lowly servants beneath her. Jane caught on to this pretty quickly and just scanned her items, handing them to me to bag. Well, soon enough, the transaction is over and the lady has paid. Jane and I both wish her a good night, and Jane goes to address the next customer. Hello, do you have a phone number with... Did you put my phone number in? All of us, even the customers behind this lady, were completely thrown off by how quickly she snapped at Jane. Of course, now flustered and scared, Jane stutters out and, I can't remember, and looks to me for help. There is a way to check if we did, but at the moment, I completely forgot about this because the lady's just glaring at us. The conversation went like this. Me. I can't remember either. I'm so sorry about that, ma'am. Her. I'll get it on my number. Me. Okay, just so you're aware, the only way to do that is to refund the entire transaction and scan everything back in. Her, handing me the receipt back. All right, I'm willing to do that. Me. Sorry, we can only do refunds up front. Here, let me get the manager for you. I went and grabbed the manager who was cleaning the other registers. She takes the customer and I go back to Jane. Now, this lady is not being quiet about her complaints. I shouldn't have to babysit everything they do. Maybe if your cashiers weren't so incompetent. And it's clear Jane is hearing these nasty comments. The customers that were behind the lady tried to distract her, and it somewhat works. Well, this manager only works 1 day a week. This job is only a second job for her, and she's done with this lady's belittlement. Yes, you shouldn't have to babysit their every actions, but that cashier is new. And as a clear regular, you should have known that. I'm not going to stand for you belittling my cashier, so if you keep being snippy, I'll do one right back. This transaction is on your phone number already, so your little hissy fit was for nothing. Oh, and 4 of those Mountain Dews? You didn't pay for those. I gained respect for that manager that night, and I hope Jane is still going strong, because she went through so much stuff that night for no reason. For clarification, it was an error on Jane's part that left the Mountain Dew unpaid for, but she was new, and the quantity bun sometimes decided it's done for the day. Still funny that because she decided to be mean, she lost the chance to get free stuff. Story 14. My parents recently passed the restaurant down to me, so I cleaned it up and presently, it's going well, getting good money. But then this Karen came along and ordered some food. 15 minutes later, she comes back, ate almost everything on her plate, and dared to say that she wanted a refund because it's not her order. So I tell her, I'm also a cashier by the way, that she ate most of it, so she can't get a refund anymore. She starts screaming and in perfect Karen fashion, asks for the manager. So I say, I am the manager. What do you need? She looks shocked and just says she wants the CEO. Me. My parents owned it and passed it down to me, so I'm the CEO. She scoffs and walks away and just leaves without paying. So the police officers at the door of the restaurant dash at her and she's forced to pay. The only way this could be better if every time she demanded to talk to someone, he did a little twirl and ta-da! Amazing. Well done. Story 15. This was like 40 years ago, but Dad and I just talked about it the other day and still had a good laugh out of it. I was running in the Junior Olympics when I was in 8th grade. Our meet was held at New Albany High School in southern Indiana. They had this obnoxious old groundskeeper who thought he was in charge of the world. Old dude just stood around yelling at people for walking across the football field. It's a track meet, you old codger. The track surrounds the field and we weren't walking all the way around the track to get to the other side. To give him credit, the football field was in really good condition. Probably too good for a team as undeserving of quality facilities as New Albany was at the time, because they weren't good. A couple of guys went walking across the field, probably in their 20s or so, spectators, not competitors at the meet, and right on cue, the garden gnome started howling, "Stay off the football field!" One of the guys immediately popped back with, "Can we at least go through the end zones? New Albany doesn't use those." Story 16. I went to Chipotle once when I was 19 and I was waiting in line behind these 2 women in their 40s, I would guess. And they were acting like high school mean girls who kept berating the young girl that was making their food. Complaining about the portion sizes, complaining about how she was making it. They even complained that she was stupid for putting both burritos in one bag because how were they going to know which was which? That was the final straw for me. I went off at them and told them they were ridiculously rude people who should be ashamed of themselves and should shut up, take their food, and leave. They were flabbergasted and mumbled some things under their breath while glaring at me, but they left. The manager came over to me and said my food was free and thanked me for telling them off because they're not allowed to. Story 17. Back when I was in college, I had a part-time job in a call center for a cell phone company, so I'd get calls from customers. They were pretty evenly split between people who needed help with some small tech issue and people who had some issue with their bill or service. Many of the billing issues had to do with people who didn't pay their cell phone bill on time and their service got suspended. Most of the time, those people had terrible credit, and that's why the company only agreed to give them a very specific sort of contract that severely limited the things they could do and how much money they could owe, as well as for how long, before their cell simply stopped working. This was partly for their protection so they wouldn't rack up even more charges, but Also because the company knew, based on their credit score, that they were terrible at paying their debts. It was a terrible business decision to allow some broke guys to keep racking up thousands of dollars in cell phone charges across months and months when they couldn't pay, and often didn't even intend to pay. So this one time, some humongous lady called me, demanding to get her service reactivated in the rudest way possible. After checking her account in the system and patiently explaining the situation, suggesting she pay her due balance to get her line reactivated as soon as possible, she demanded to know how a total nobody like me, working at a call center, even dared to try to tell her, a successful and very important entrepreneur, what to do with her money. She let me know that my incompetence was causing her to lose business because her wealthy clients couldn't call her phone. I was probably 19 or so at the time, and I admit I lost my cool at that point. I told her that I was just a college student and this was my part-time job, and even so, I still had a much better credit score than her. Like her, I understood that paying my cell phone bill was my responsibility, and I also knew how to read the contracts I signed. No important businessman had a $150 limit in their cell phone bill, and if, for some inexplicable reason, they did, and it was indispensable for their job, they'd simply pay it on time every month. She flipped her lid and demanded to talk to my supervisor. To be honest, she had angered me off so much at that point I didn't care if I got fired, so I handed my headset to the supervisor. However, after listening to her vision of the events and putting her briefly on hold to check with me, he promptly told her to get out and pay her outstanding bill because the only way her service would be suspended was if she was more than a month late with her payments. And that was completely on her. He told her to stop wasting everybody's time trying to pretend she was some VIP and being mean in order to get a service she was literally refusing to pay for, despite having signed a contract, because she was broke. He hung up on her when she tried to argue. Then he just turned to me, handed me my headset, and nodded before walking back to his desk like he was Wolverine walking away from the helicopter. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. I was at Starbucks once with my toddler. I was in line behind a lady. She was nice enough at first, but then she was asking if they could make change for her. They very politely explained that their system literally prevented them from opening the drawer unless there was a cash sale, or something along those lines. I threw in one of those, oh man, yeah, they really stopped the staff from being able to do all sorts of things. Bummer. To both sympathize with the lady and also support the staff. Well, this woman would not let it go. She starts doing the whole, I come here all the time, blah blah blah. The shift supervisor comes over and tries so hard to explain they literally can't do it. Meanwhile, the line is growing and they're already packed and have a drive-through window backed up too. The moment she started raising her voice at the staff and being unkind, I went ahead and told her she was behaving inappropriately. I told her that she can't expect them to just magically have the ability to do something because she comes here a lot. From her perspective, she told me to mind my own business. And I told her the staff weren't allowed to speak their minds because they want to keep their jobs. So someone has to stick up for them. She got all ugly-faced to me and called me Mr. Cool Ponytail because I had started growing my hair long since my little boy wanted to grow his hair too. It's one of my favorite things to quote. It's also one of the few times I had a real laughing reaction to someone trying to insult me because it was just so desperate how she did it. And she repeated it again by saying, "You and your ponytail," and told me she was a business owner. I told her I have no idea what that has to do with any of this. She left. Anyway, the supervisor gave me some free gift cards in the sly after that, which was unnecessary but very nice of him. And for the record, it was in a messy bun. I've never worn it in a ponytail. Story 19. I was working in a fishmonger's counter at the supermarket in the UK. It was my last ever shift with the company before I moved across the country to start a new career. And as much as I was enjoying my last day, I also couldn't give less care about what I did. I got to the end of my shift, and no one had come to relieve me. I'm in the process of filleting a salmon, a 10 to 15 minute process, all in with deboning and the like, and I'm already 10 minutes late finishing my shift. At this point, a very snooty woman comes up to me, clicks at me and says, "Boy, I want a salmon fillet too. I want this one, and I'll be back in 10 minutes to collect it." To which I responded, "Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm 10 minutes late leaving anyway, and I'm not sticking around any longer. Also, don't be so rude." She gets in an epic huff at this point, starts to berate me for calling her rude, saying she's going to report me to customer services, my manager, corporate, anyone she can think of if I don't prepare her salmon for her right now. At this point, I pull out my ace and just say, "Sure thing, go ahead. This is my last ever shift. As of 15 minutes ago, I'm technically no longer employed by this company, so honestly, take your attitude and get stuffed. Maybe someone will come and prepare you a salmon, but you aren't my problem anymore, and goodbye." And I walked off flipping the bird over each shoulder as this Karen absolutely combusted with rage, calling me every name under the sun and saying she was never going to shop there again, etc., etc. All the usual Karen stuff. But I'd had enough of these people, and I was actually glad that I got to leave in a blaze of glory like that. It was 3 p.m. I'd been up since 4:45 a.m. I was done. So yeah, get stuffed, Karen. Story 20. I work at a small local bakery, but big enough that we have 2 locations. I had a woman come in to order a cake, already extremely impatient. I take her down to the order area where the computers are. She brought in her own coffee, which we sell, which isn't a problem except it was also in an open mug. But I don't say anything about it because she's clearly already in a testy mood. I give her a book to look through some of our cake selections. She goes to sit down in her lobby. I tell her, I apologize, ma'am, but because we've had some people carry off her book, it is huge, extensive, and hard to replace, I have to ask you to stay at the counter. She gets huffy, asking if she has to stand the whole time, so I bring her a chair, which is no issue. She sits down and sets her coffee in the computer, like on the modem. I say, ma'am, I do apologize, but if you don't mind moving your coffee so we don't have any accidents. She gets extremely angry, yelling about how this is why she wanted to sit down in her lobby and how disrespectful and uncomfortable I'm making her feel. She then throws the book down on the table and walks out, yelling about how she would be going to the other location and telling them about this. Lo and behold, as soon as she walks out the door, our baker says no more cake orders for either store. We're full. I've never felt more satisfied than knowing she left our store, fully able to order a cake, and drove to the other store, only to no longer be able to order one. And the only person she can blame is herself. Story 21. I used to work at a fancier natural foods and vitamins store in the summer between college. There were a lot of Karens who came in. Think gluten-free this and allergic to that type of Karen. Additional context. There's this local bakery company that makes insanely good gluten-free bread. Every time we got it in the store, it would sell out in a matter of hours. We usually get deliveries on Tuesday and Friday mornings, which most of our regulars knew about. This one lady comes in on a Thursday night, so essentially zero chance of us having the bread in stock. She looked around for like 30 seconds and then came up to me and demanded the bread. Like it was not a question. She literally just barked the name of the company at me. I told her where it was in the store, but that it was very likely we were out of stock. She barely hears me and just goes, check in the back. Now, this was a small store, so we didn't really have a back stock room or anything, and we definitely did not keep local, individually delivered items in what little back stock we had. I knew it wasn't worth explaining this to her, so I go back to double check, knowing I won't find anything. I come back empty-handed and she demands to speak to a manager. So I go get the manager, who tells her the same thing I did. Finally, she accepts she's not getting her bread tonight. You tell her we usually get deliveries from the bakery Friday morning, so if she comes back early tomorrow, we should have some in stock. The next day, she comes in at like 7 p.m. We opened at 8 a.m. and demands her bread. I'm honestly not even sure if she recognized me or not, but I went through the exact same thing as the night before, apologizing, checking the back, and explaining that we sold out before I even started my closing shift that day at 2. She's not having it. And again, we go through the whole manager escalation thing. Eventually, again, she storms out without her bread, obviously. We think that's the end of it. The next day, we get a call from the bakery that makes this bread. The guy on the phone says they've received complaints from a customer about us refusing to sell the bread to her. My manager explains the situation with Karen, and I can hear the bakery guy laughing in the phone. Apparently, this lady had already been banned from their bakery location for making a scene and throwing things at employees and had been going around every store that sells the bread in a similar fashion. My manager ended up officially banning her from the store a bit later, and the look on her face the next time she tried to come in was so beautiful I will never forget it. I got to see the weight of the realization that her actions have consequences. We found out a few months later that she was the ex-wife of the owner of the bakery. I bet she was trying to annoy the store so much about the bread that they'd stop carrying it. Like, obviously that won't work, but stupid people are stupid. No wonder she's an ex-wife. Story 22. About 12 years ago, I had a coworker who was in the military. He did a couple of hours in the sandbox, lost his leg to an IED, and mustered out of the service. When we worked together, he had a prosthetic leg, though it fit him well enough that he only rarely had to walk with a cane for balance. He didn't have a handicap plate in his car. He had a placard that you hung in your rearview mirror. Anyway, we were going to lunch off-site one afternoon. We pulled up at the deli and parked in a handicap parking spot. As one does, he was in the middle of saying, "Virtual Adapt, could you go in my glove compartment and get my placard?" When a woman walked up to his side of the car, knocked on the window, and began berating him for using a handicapped parking space. "What do you think you're doing? Don't you know there are crippled people in wheelchairs who need that?" Yes, she said that. I wasn't sure what to do. I was sitting there with my hand in the glove box, wondering what he was going to do. My coworker sat there for a good, long while, listening to this woman yell at him. 3, maybe 4 minutes outside. Total poker face, like it was carved out of stone. He rolled his window down, he popped his prosthetic leg off and handed it to her. Story 23. Walking out of an Outback, a group of Karens is being seated. They start saying how they're going to get the steak and tails deal, this and that, etc. The waitress comes over and tells them the steak and tails is only on Tuesdays and they'll have to pay full price. Then she shows them where it says on the menu. They get upset and start pulling out their phones, and the waitress just starts to walk off, telling them, "Fine, if you can find some ads saying the deal is for today, I can help. But I have actual work to do, so I'll be back in a few." I was already halfway out the door, so I didn't see the fallout, but it was quite the kiss-off from that waitress, and I give her props for how she handled it. Story 24. A guy tried to insert in front of me as I was at the counter of a store. He took my things and started pushing them off the counter and put his things in the cashier's hands. The cashier wasn't sure what to do, but I told the guy what he was doing, etc. And the guy lost it. He says it was in front of me, but he wasn't. He literally walked in front of me while I was at the head of the line. It quickly escalates and the guy's close to yelling. Finally, he says, "Fine, I'll see you outside." I sigh, buy my things, and see out the front door the guy stomping around, doing a little tantrum like a toddler, though he had a big bald spot and a ponytail. I'm not sure what to do. I'm not going to back down, but it's in the center of downtown in a very public area, and I don't feel like going to jail just for defending myself. In the time it took to get my things together and walk outside to begin whatever's going to happen, the guy's gone. I'm confused, walk out and look around, and the guy's across the street in cuffs. The cop is doing the watch your head thing as he gets him in the back of the cop car. I don't really know what happened, but I would guess he got so peeved off that I didn't let him insert in front of me. He started the beef with the cop and got arrested for it. Story 25. I was delivering food. I park, go into the building. Of course, it's many stories up, so it takes me a few minutes. I come out and some lady has me blocked in and starts questioning me. "What's your business here?" She wants my name. I tell her I'm delivering food. She demands my name, who I delivered to, and my company name, or she will call the police. I tell her to do what she wants. Now she starts to take pictures of my car, my plates, and me. I give her a big old smile. I ask her politely to move so I can be on my way. She refuses until I answer her questions. I just want to leave at this point. I answer her questions with, "My name is George Lincoln, my company name is Dash Eats." I told her the main office is in New York City, and who I delivered to was apartment 61. I was 16. She seems satisfied and backs up. As I'm getting in my car, she says, "I'm going to hear from my bosses." I say, "Okay, ma'am." What in the world makes these women act this way? Story 26. I worked at a Hardee's in college as a shift manager. Karen comes strutting in with a rolled up bag of food and a receipt. She asks for the manager. I ask how I can help. She goes on to complain about the food she had gotten was all wrong and was gross. Her burger didn't have the fixings. Small burgers didn't get the fixings. And then she complained about the lettuce being wilted and gross. I ask to see the receipt. She's fuming, demanding a refund. I look at the receipt and it's from 2 days ago. She then proceeds to pull out a fish sandwich, opens the buns, and yells, "Would you serve this to a child?" At this point, the entire restaurant is watching this lady freak out about the quality of food she bought 2 days prior. I calmly and quietly look her dead in the eye and say, "No, ma'am, I would not serve that food to a child. It's literally 2 days old and that's just negligent." She stormed out and I never saw her again. She called and complained the next day to her store manager. The whole thing was on camera and he just laughed and said, "Don't do that again. Just give her a refund." Story 27. I was at a bodega in New York City once, and a woman was arguing with a clerk because they charged $5 for a pint of ice cream that she insisted was actually $4.50 because the place 3 blocks away charges that. She was holding up the line, and after spending a solid minute letting her know that's not how prices work, the sandwich I ordered got brought to the register and just so happened to cost $9.50. I gave them a $10 bill, and after getting 2 quarters back, I said, "She obviously needs this more than I do," and started walking to the door. She turns to me and goes, "You know you're mean, right?" And I go to say to her, "At least I'm not stupid," as I walked out. It sounds too good to be true, but I swear to God that's exactly what happened. Story 28. This was 20 plus years ago on a Halloween weekend. My friend and I were headed to a costume party and made a pit stop at Walmart. We were both in costume. He was Zorro and I was Uncle Fester. We were in the checkout lane, and I looked around me. I have anxiety, so I prefer to be aware of my surroundings. Behind me was a woman and her young daughter. I didn't engage, but the daughter took one look at me and started screaming. The mom, or Karen, starts to unleash on me. "Who in the world do you think you are, walking around like that, scaring innocent people? Today isn't even Halloween. You're a horrible person, and you need to take that off right now." Me. "It wasn't my intention to scare your daughter. How about this? Let's compromise. I'll remove my makeup if you take off your mask." Karen. "But I'm not You?" She then tried to hurt me. I maintained my composure. looked at the cashier and asked if she could page security. Cops are called. Karen is escorted out in handcuffs. Story 29. I was working as a videographer for a business conference full of middle managers posturing for executive positions. It was at a tropical beach resort hotel, and everything was super fancy and extravagant as a show of wealth. Our client, my boss's cousin and the ultimate head honcho for the conference, told us it was okay for us to just eat the food provided for attendees, which was a really nice spread. So me and the crew happily started serving up during one of the meal breaks. One of the attendees noticed we weren't dressed in suits and ties and told us he was part of the steering committee for this closed event, and that was the last meal we would get away with stealing. He warned us if he saw us again, he would contact the hotel staff to have us arrested. We had an interview room set up after dinner, and we recorded interviews with the organizers and attendees of the event, supervised by our client. Guess who our next interview was? The look in that guy's face when he realized he had threatened people his boss specifically hired for this event, who worked for his cousin, for no reason except he assumed we were crashing the event because we were dressed for the production work we were presently doing and not trying to climb the corporate ladder like he was doing. He didn't apologize, but his shiny bald head sweated profusely, and we made sure to deliberately overexpose it in the footage and had frequent technical difficulties to drag it out further for him. Later, he left the interview. The head honcho sensed the tension and asked what was up. We told him the story, and that guy was immediately off the steering committee and asked to leave the conference the following morning. It would have cost him nothing to just mind his own business. The rest of that week was incredible. We filmed sessions until 3:30 every day and then basically partied like rich people on a resort vacation every evening after that while getting paid. That guy really missed out. Story 30. I had to deal with a Karen at work the other day. The gym I work for has an age restriction in place that nobody under 20 can be allowed to use the gym, and this went into effect because various teenagers had been very disrespectful in not following gym rules. 4 teenagers stole their parents' memberships and tried to sneak into the gym, but they didn't get far before gym members spotted them and informed the front desk, which then had the front desk call security. When the teens wouldn't answer the questions of security, I was brought in to talk to them. Needless to say, they were still disrespectful, but luckily I recognized them and knew who their parents were, and I had all the parents called. Of the 4 parents, only 3 were disappointed in their kids, but 1 went into full Karen mode. The mom was screaming, "Lift the age restriction! Teenagers are growing restless at home and are getting bored without being able to work out." I told her, "Tell them to do home workouts. Go outside for jogging if they want to work out. The restriction stays in place." The woman then tried to hurt me, but I caught it and had security cuffs on both the mother and her teenager. They got arrested in charges of trespassing for the teenager and attempted crime on me for the mom. The get-stuffed moment being that Karen learned harming and screaming doesn't get her what she wants.
What happened that time you saw the fury of a patient man? I laughed. My dad has the patience of a saint. You never see him get angry. He's quiet, calm, and so laid back, pretty much like me. Even when we were kids, he never gave us a telling off at all. It was always Mom's job, as she was strict. Anyway, we were at the dinner table, and me and my siblings were all bickering. Not sure about what. All of a sudden, my dad slams his fists on the table and shouts, "Shut up!" We all put our heads down in shock, as we never experienced this before. One by one, we started to giggle. Even our mom started giggling. We looked over to my dad, who was looking down at his plate, and all we could see was his shoulders going up and down, and of course, he just burst out laughing. I think he shocked himself that day, but no one could take it seriously. That's how you know he was truly stressed. The man resorted to yelling. I bet he still feels guilty about it. Story 2. I worked with this theater director who was well known for being one of the nicest and most intelligent people you can meet. But there was one actor in the show who was an A-grade pain in the back. She would constantly be late for rehearsals. Once, she didn't show up at all. The reason was her girlfriend was in a car accident, but the problem was she didn't tell the stage manager, director, or anyone she wasn't coming. We found out through Facebook. This was a show with some deaf cast members, and some hearing actors who didn't know ASL had to do some signing, so we brought in an ASL instructor. This woman, though, did some ASL and thought she knew better than the college professor and would constantly try to correct her. We were doing a spacing rehearsal in one of our touring spaces, with very limited time. This is 2 months into the rehearsal process, and the director has finally had enough of her having a backhanded comment for everything. He adjusts her blocking slightly, just because the space we're in is a bit different. She starts to say something and the director just screams, "The show isn't about you, goddammit!" And he throws his script to the ground so that pages fly everywhere. It's the first time any of us have ever heard him yell or curse in anger. She runs off stage crying. Then he calmly says, "Can we get back to work, please?" And then later, during a break, I overhear him talking to her about how he's going to tell everyone he knows in theater never to hire her or work with her. Story 3. Worked at a retail store. The manager was a very kind and soft-spoken man, about 5'5" and not scrawny, but not built. I never saw him lose his temper. Except once. A guy in another department was stocking shelves, Bill, and he's in a wheelchair. A huge, gnarly-looking guy comes up and starts arguing with Bill about whether or not they have this or that, and the guy loses his temper. Tries to pull Bill out of his chair to roughen him up. I was further down the aisle, but I started towards them because hell no you don't mess with Bill. Out of absolutely nowhere comes my manager. I mean, he flew out of thin air and tackled this guy to the ground. And after some hits, the schmuck gave up and my manager subdued him until the police arrived some 15 or so minutes later. Story 4. So one of my mates at school is always gentle and kind and never really reacts when crap happens to him. He's a pretty muscular dude, so, whenever we pass him during school, he usually gets his arms grabbed by one of the boys. Well, one day at lunch, someone grabbed his arm and then shoved a chip into his mouth. You wouldn't want to be the guy that did that because my mate grabbed a handful of chips in one hand, the guy by his shirt in the other, and then proceeded to drag the guy along one of the benches whilst harming him in the mouth with a handful of chips. Suffice to say, we learned that day not to take crap too far with my mate. Story 5. Okay, so this story is about me. I'm a very laid-back, stoic, water off a duck's back kind of guy. I was a skinny little geeky kid with a smart mouth, but funny. I got picked on at times, but never really let it bother me. But one day I was coming home from school and there was a kid standing in the street outside of my house. As I walked up, he called out to me and asked me if I was your real name. I walked up to him and told him that was me. And then he pulled his hand out of his pocket and shoved a friggin' weapon. I lost my crap. Cue adrenaline surge, grabbed the wrist holding the weapon and subdued him. That took him to the ground. And I just walked away to where my dog, Bear, was straining at the end of this chain trying to get at the guy. Let the chain loose and Bear went crazy. The guy got up real quick and ran. No idea what happened after that. Bear came back about 45 minutes later, none the worse for wear. Over 20 years later now, and I still have the weapon the kid dropped. A scar above my knee and no clue who he was or why he harmed me. By far the most surreal experience in my life. Story 6. In the study hall in high school, I was sitting at a table with some friends. One of my friends sitting with us was from another group of friends and didn't really know the other guys sitting with us very well. He's a very nice and shy kid, but enormous. Like 6'4", 300 pounds enormous. Anyway, one of my other friends, a tiny kid, maybe 130 pounds tops, is messing with him and teasing him a bit. But the big guy is ignoring him and just doing his own work. But eventually, the right button was pushed. I don't remember how. And without warning, the smaller, annoying kid is flying through the air into the wall. Pretty funny. Story 7. Story from my dad. When he was younger, probably around 17 or 18, he got in a car accident, which wasn't his fault. He happened to be in a car accident with some hot-headed lawyer who threatened him physically and told him that he, my dad, would pay for it because he was a lawyer. My dad tells me that my grandfather was a very calm man who contained himself despite being able to put up a fight both physically and intellectually with most people. Well, my grandfather got word of this and went to the house where that lawyer lived. My grandfather fought in World War II, played semi-pro football, and boxed in Philadelphia. My dad does not know what happened, but they never heard from that lawyer again. And he got a new car. My grandfather took what he did that day to the grave. Story 8. My dad is probably the perfect example of this. We were on a Boy Scout trip, and the scoutmaster was notoriously weird. He made a disparaging remark about my mom. And my dad picked this guy up and threw him over a picnic table. He stood up completely calm and said, "Son, grab your things. People like this deserve no respect, and I won't have you associate with him." He's a good dude. Story 9. My grandfather. He was very quiet. He kept mostly to himself. All I knew was that he was a photographer, because his house was filled with old black and white photographs and he loved to build models, especially model airplanes. There was a point in my youth when he took me to his workshop and helped me put together a remote-controlled airplane. Even then, he didn't talk much, and when we did talk, it was all about how to put the plane together properly. Even though I never really interacted with him much, it was the person in my life who taught me how to be patient. People took him seriously. People respected him. Then, one Christmas, my aunt got in a fight with my uncle, her brother-in-law. I don't even remember what it was about, but I remember my grandfather ended it. The fight was escalating, and without warning, my grandfather shouted, "Stop it!" He stopped. Everyone was shocked. He rarely, if ever, raised his voice. He then just said, calmly, as though he didn't just scream at them, "We're family. There are children here. Don't raise them to be fools by acting like fools in front of them." It stuck with me. I think it stuck with everyone, because the conversation ended. Oh, Grandpa, the world needs more men with their priorities straight like you. Story 10. My dad has always been kind and fairly quiet. Not shy by any means, but certainly more of an introvert. At the time this happened, he was 6 foot tall and maybe 190 pounds. I should preface this by saying I grew up in a small town. Everyone went hunting, and weapon safety was something kids were taught from a young age. We lived at the end of a T intersection, such that our house faced down the stem of the T. At the bottom of that stem lived a dog. This dog got out a few times and terrified my sister, who was probably about 7 or 8. It also chased our cat, who climbed the exterior of our front door. When I opened the door to see what the commotion was, the cat fell on my head. Scared cats with claws falling on the head of a 6-year-old? Not something you'd like to experience, for anyone curious. Anyway, one day the dog gets out again. My sister runs home in tears, terrified of this dog. My dad decided enough was enough. On that hot summer day, he got himself a glass of iced tea. He put his weapon in his holster. He pulled out a lawn chair, grabbed a book, and sat in our driveway. With a clear view of the house with the dog, he waited until the owner came home. Hours passed. My mother checked on him frequently, refilling his iced tea as needed. When the guy got him, my dad walked down the street. He knocked on the guy's door and told him, quite plainly, that the next time that damn dog gets out, I'm going to fire at the dog, and then I'm going to fire at you. The fence was promptly fixed, and the dog never chased my sister again. I'm surprised his dad thought this was acceptable. I'm shocked he wasn't charged. Story 11. There was this quiet, nerdy Asian guy I was friends with in high school who was super nice. One day, someone caught him in a bad mood and was picking on him. My Asian friend walked by the guy as if he were leaving the room and then whipped around behind his tormentor and full-on suplexed the guy out of the room. Not just a toss. This was a back-arching WWE-style suplex, and I laughed until I cried. Story 12. Not a man, but my twin brother when we were in 5th grade. I got picked on a lot when I was in middle school. My brother is one of those people who is very calm unless someone picks on me, then he'll snap. One day we were in the locker bay, and my brother overheard someone calling me a nerd. He then grabbed the kid by the shirt and said, "Nerd or nerd candy?" We were 11. The kid says, Nerd. Then my brother said, "Wrong answer." He slammed him as hard as he could into the lockers. Not many people picked on me after that. Story 13. My father is a lawyer who only takes work in finance cases, like someone who was fired unfairly or a bank that messed up someone's credit. He's a very calm, collected, and intelligent man. This situation happened when I was just a baby, when my sister was about 14. She's 13 years older than me. Anyway, she was coming home from volleyball practice one day, and there was a construction on the street we lived in. One of the construction workers started whistling and calling her cutie and babe and started walking towards her. She started walking faster, but he caught up and tried to grab her, so he dropped her backpack and ran home. When she got there, she told my mom and dad about it. My mom said dad spent some 5 minutes making sure my sister was okay, then told mom, "Stay here taking care of her. I'll be right back." So he goes out to the street, weapon in hand. Story goes he got a cut in on the guy before some 5 other dudes managed to hold him back. Police were called and the construction worker was arrested. Before I heard the story, I never knew my dad had such a side to him. Story 14. My second-year electronics teacher in high school was one of the nicest, patient men I've ever met. He restores models in his spare time. He had to go to the office for something, and a couple kids thought it would be funny to hook together line cords, put them into power strips, and turn them on and watch them arc and burn the table. Teacher came back and lost his crap, screaming at them and telling them to stay after class. The only time I ever saw him raise his voice. Story 15. This is my story. I was in high school. Some guy picked on me, calling me fat, etc. I normally gave no crap because, unless you're dragonborn, words don't hurt. I dealt with it for a month, until one of them messed on my coffee cake and slapped me. You do not mess with me or my beloved coffee cake. He turned around and walked off. I pushed him from the back and put my leg in front of his, tripping him. I furiously kicked him and walked away. His buddy showed the principal a video they took of me kicking him, but a bunch of witnesses said I was just defending myself. I got a day of detention for every kick. He got a 3-day suspension for pestering violence. Story 16. I'm at my friend's house for dinner. Ever have that friend that you rarely see the dad? He's always working, or even if he's home, you just never see him. That was Patrick's dad. I don't even think I heard his voice more than a few times in the 5 years or so I knew him. Well, I was 12 or so. And we're at the dinner table. Patrick's little sister is across from him. I'm next to Patrick. His mom and dad are on the ends of the table. Patrick starts kicking his sister in a way that he hopes no one notices. He was wrong. His dad lets it go on for about 5, maybe 7 minutes. Out of nowhere, his dad gives him this huge, open-handed slap across the face that sends him out of his chair and onto the floor. No warning or nothing. Just a huge Andre the Giant-like slap. Patrick is bawling. The dad, in a quiet voice, says, "Go to your room." Then he locks eyes with me and goes back to eating. So then it became one of the most awkward moments ever. Still have no idea how I was supposed to react. Mom and dad said nothing. Sister said nothing. like it was completely normal to assault a 12-year-old kid at the dinner table. I just sat there wondering, do I go to my friend's room? Do I eat? Do I just sit? Do I go home? I kind of pushed my fish sticks around and ate really slowly and waited until the mom, who was cool, said I was excused and went to my friend's room. I was terrified of his dad after that and felt bad for my friend. Story 17. Back when we were 12 or 13 years old, a classmate or friend of mine was the Game Boy geek of our class. He was the guy whom you gave your Game Boy to, and he did the level or boss for you with ease. Also, he was playing Game Boy on the bus ride home each day. One day, a kid comes up to him and keeps turning off his Game Boy. He shows no reaction and calmly turns it back on like nothing happened and continues to play. The other kid keeps turning it off over and over again. But this goes back and forth for some time. When the other kid reaches for the 15th time to turn off the Game Boy, my friend, without taking his eyes off from the screen, calmly intercepts his finger, hurts it, and continues to silently play his game. Story 18. When I was at school, about 13, there was a girl who was so stereotypical. She was quiet, always with her head in a book, and didn't really care about what was happening around her. One day, a guy started trying to fight me. He pushed me to the ground and started kicking me. Without a word, this girl, who was also pestered by this guy, got up and hurt him in the face, knocking him out cold. We're dating now. Story 19. I was in elementary school, 6th grade, I think, and there was a group of guys that would target a new kid every week. One week, they decided I was their new target, and they started calling me names and physically attacking me on the playground. I went to the teacher, the recess aide, and my parents, and they all told me to go to one of the others for help. One day, they started spreading a rumor that I had a crush on this one girl. I wouldn't have minded, but they were leaving papers with it everywhere, and people were starting to pester the girl about it. I decided I had enough. A couple days go by, and we went to the book fair, a yearly store where kids can buy books, funny or weird pencils, science kits, etc. One of my friends walked up with one of the sticky notes they wrote and asked me if it was true. I didn't answer and walked off to find the longest pencil I could. I found one that was probably 2 times as long as a normal pencil and walked around until I found the captain of the schmuck canoe. I waited until his back was turned, snuck up behind him, and whipped him. He started bawling, and the teacher ran over to see what had happened. I explained the situation, and she took both of us to the principal's office. The kid got suspended for a day or two, and I got off scot-free. They didn't bother me after that. Story 20. We've all seen teachers lose their crap from time to time. There was a regular substitute in high school we all had at one time or another. She was very nice and soft-spoken. She was also very small, short, and thin. She's the wife of a teacher or wrestling coach. He was her polar opposite. He was very strict and had a short fuse. We all heard him flip out in his class at least once. Anyway, our teacher is out, a nice lady subbing one day. There's a special needs girl in her class. She's just kind of slow, shy, and awkward. She didn't have any friends and just kept to herself. Anyway, one of the regular oppressors starts picking on her. He's a big jock type. He told her he heard she had intimacy with so-and-so and asked if she was pregnant. Nice lady freaking freaks out. She's yelling at him at the top of her lungs about mistreatment. It was so bad another teacher came in and checked on us. Nice lady just said, "No, I'll handle this." He walked up to his desk and screamed at him, "Get up! Get your things!" She grabbed his arm and took him to the office. He was crying. They just started this zero tolerance thing, so he got suspended. She left the room as the Hulk and came back as the nice lady. She spoke quiet and softly to the girl for a minute or so, and that was the end of it. The rest of us are just sitting there like, oh my God, what in the world just happened? Story 21. I may be late, but here goes. So, people know me as a really chill and calm guy. I've been called a no-life, horse crap, and I just shrug it off. But like most people, I have a breaking point. And I, myself, honestly don't want to hit that breaking point. Unfortunately, one guy wants to see it. This dude has been pestering me for close to 2 years, calling me names that would reduce other people to tears or madness, but I held on. Then he proceeded to call my sister a She passed away just a week ago. I felt the adrenaline rush and complete hate for this dude. I grabbed a pen in front of me and proceeded to hurt him. And that's how I ended up in jail. Anyways, politics these days. Crazy, right? Story 22. Back in school, there was a kid who used to like to think of himself as a bit of a hard man. In reality, he was anything but, and liked to assert that authority by pushing around kids he didn't think would do anything about it. There wasn't always a pattern to it, like, didn't always go for the nerdy kids. Literally just anybody that seemed like they'd let him get away with it. So one day, he's physically pushing this guy around a bit, a pretty regular nice guy. No reason for him being singled out except that he was fairly quiet. Jeering at him, making fun of him, and grinning like it was the funniest thing in the world. That is, right up until the moment the kid spun around and planted a perfect hit. He turned back round and carried on like nothing had happened. Nobody tried to pick on that kid again. and the loudmouth guy quieted down a lot after that. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 23. True story, although not serious per se. Hope that's okay. Linear algebra at my upscale private college was taught by a 70-year-old man who was the nicest, kindest, most patient person imaginable. He was still teaching because he wanted to, and he liked what he was doing. Nothing fazed this guy. In the back of the class was Prince Imran, a little Middle Eastern prince who was there on the daddy plan. For whatever reason, Prince Imran was constantly asking questions in class, and they were just stupid questions. The kind of questions that destroyed my belief that there are no stupid questions in the first week. Our prof would just smile and graciously work through the answer. Finally, one fine day, our prof finished up a proof with, and so we can see that n is divisible by 2, so it must be even. Without missing a beat, Prince Imran immediately sticks up his hand and blurts out, but 6 is divisible by 3, so is it not also odd? Our prof just lost it. Started screaming at the guy. Every time you open your mouth, etc., etc. After a minute or two of purple apoplexy, they finally recognized the humor of the situation and started to laugh. The rest of the class was literally laughing so hard at this point that they could barely breathe. Never saw Prince Imran after that class. Think he may have decided mathematics wasn't for him. Prof finally retired a couple of years ago at age 90. I've kept in touch a bit. Never saw him get worked up before or since. And that is the story of Prince Imran's theorem. Any number divisible by 3 is odd. Works half the time. Story 24. My dad was an amazing man, and he was always friendly to everyone except for people who would talk about his family. In high school, he played football. American, obviously. Once, while he was in high school, well, maybe a few more times, some idiot joked about his mom, which is never a good thing to do unless you know the person. He picked him up by the collar and slammed him against the wall in the hallway. A few teachers and the principal ran to him and all had to combine their powers like the freaking Power Rangers and finally got him to let go. Story 25. This is an old family story. My grandparents had 4 children. The father, the oldest, my Aunt Wendy, and the youngest were twin daughters, Lucy and Lily. They were all born within 4 or 5 years of each other. With 4 children every day at breakfast, lunch, or dinner, someone ended up spilling something. My grandfather would ask them why they always spilled. They told him, "You must have spilled sometime, Dad." And he then told them that he never spilled anything a day in his life. Although they doubted it, they had never actually seen him spill something, so they had no argument back. One night, my grandfather, the doctor, went out to dinner with some colleagues. My grandmother fed everyone dinner and put everyone to bed. My father, maybe 6 or 7 at the time, was still awake when his father got home. My grandfather comes inside and my grandmother asks him how dinner was. He was very upset and, talking louder than he should have in a house full of children, said, "It was terrible. I spilled duck soup all over my lap. My suit is ruined. The night was a disaster." Spilled, my father heard. "Daddy spilled? Daddy spilled!" He tiptoed into his sister Wendy's room and woke her up. "Daddy spilled! Daddy spilled! Daddy spilled!" They tiptoed into the twins' room and woke them up. At that point, there were 4 excited children running down the stairs yelling, "Daddy spilled! Daddy spilled! Daddy spilled!" Chanting and screaming and laughing, probably the only thing that could have made my grandfather's night worse. After that, whenever someone spilled, he had to say, "I've only spilled once," but it wasn't the same. Story 26. I was sitting in class one day in middle school. It was silent reading time, but you could hear someone whispering from the front of the row to someone at the end of the row. It was a newish kid, making inappropriate comments toward a popular girl in the back. A guy I used to hang out with as a kid was really nice, very slow to anger. While he was sitting directly behind the inappropriate dude and was warning him to stop talking to her like that. He warned him twice, but he kept doing it. All of a sudden, silent reading time was interrupted by the sound of a face pounding a desk. I look up and see my childhood friend slamming the sky like it was a yo-yo, up and down very quickly. The kid got up and they were both sent to the front office. That guy never pestered her or anyone else, I'm sure, again. Story 27. A bit late to the party, but my stepdad. He's an incredibly patient, down-to-earth, laid-back, and soft-spoken kind of guy. For context, both of my parents look incredibly young for their ages and were often mistaken for siblings or friends. Stepdad, myself, and my little brother were walking around an outdoor shopping center once when a group of guys around my age walked past me. Their ringleader blatantly giving me a once-over and then turning to his friends to say, "Would," with a smirk on his face. Now, my stepdad isn't ridiculously tall. At 6'2"-ish, but he's a pretty big, muscular guy. Instantly froze, backtracked, and then grabbed the ringleader by the front of his shirt while his friends watched on in shock. "Would what?" he asked. When he got no response, besides a terrified, "I've just whizzed myself" expression, he just laughed and said, She wouldn't even give you the time of day, you ugly crap. Let him go and we carried on with our day. Me with a particularly huge grin on my face. I seriously love that man to absolute pieces. He's the definition of dad to me. Story 28. My girlfriend's stepdad is rather quiet, but a very passive guy, even when he was upset. He never raised his voice or got confrontational. However, her brother showed up late and intoxicated to a family dinner. Her mom flipped out on her son and hid his keys because he was trying to leave. He began to spew out nonsense while everyone was trying to enjoy their dinner, threatening to call the police over his stolen keys. After about 30 minutes of countless slanders, he progressed to calling his mom foul names and belligerently yelling at everyone until Neil, stepdad, stood up and got in his face, yelling, "You want your keys so bad? Come on, big man. Let's see if the cops down at the station think you're good enough to drive." Her brother instantly turned submissive and trembled over his next words, but Neil wasn't having it. "You think you can talk to your mother, my wife, like that?" Neil grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pulled him outside. We were all looking at each other at the table until the first snicker turned into an uproar of laughter. Story 29. I can remember a situation in which my father and I were the patient men. My parents had been divorced since I was young, and when I was in middle school, my mother started dating a man who was emotionally and mentally cruel to me, and more than likely, though I never saw it, physically with my mother. He would always yell and scream at me and her for the most useless things. He got the small fork during dinner, a travesty of epic proportions. Well, one day he told me to switch the AV cords in the back of the TV. 13 at this point. I did what I was told, but scratched the surface of the entertainment center in doing so. Well, he started screaming at me, calling me all sorts of names and then yelling about my mother and my sisters. Pro tip, don't ever come for my sisters. At some point during this time, I had called my dad to come pick me up because I'm going to explode. As I'm getting my shoes on to walk out, Mom's BF walks towards me and raises his hands like he's about to hit me. I say, "You take one more step towards me and I will harm you with this shoe." He yells something along the lines of, "Why don't you call your useless father to come pick you up?" Well, lo and behold, my father just pulled up to the house and I walked outside yelling back at him and telling my father what happened. The rage I saw in my father's eyes as he saw me in pain was something I've never seen before and haven't seen since this day. At this moment, I realized that my dad is my hero. I walks towards BF and starts screaming at him, threatening and all that jazz, and we got in the car and left. I never went back to that house, and my mom ended the relationship not soon afterwards. Story 30. Back when I was in secondary school, there was this kid. He was the loner type. We got on all right, but I wouldn't call him a great friend as such. You know, the type, says some weird crap, and everyone seems to give them crap for no reason. Well, I was walking behind the guy, and some guy in the same year, about half his height, fat, thinks he was the crap, etc., came up and started giving crap to the tall loner guy. About 3 weeks before, apparently, the lonely kid's mother had just passed away from something. I felt really bad for the kid, so I tried to be as nice as possible because I knew he didn't have many friends and was going through a lot. The little fat guy then decided to start talking crap about the guy's mom. He said some of the usual crap, and then, as he was walking off towards the top of a double flight of stairs, he shouted back without looking, "Sorry about your freaking mom, but she was still good for a couple more hours before she went cold." Well, that was it. Everyone just stopped in pure disgust, because some things you just don't say, right? Anyway, the lonely kid just dropped his crap, jacket bag, and books and sprinted at the fat guy. He just jumped and kicked this kid down the stairs. The lonely kid had tears in his eyes, stood up, gathered his stuff, and just ran off. Turns out the fat guy got excluded for 2 weeks. All of this from a guy who had been pestered for the past 4 years of school, hadn't said or done anything bad-hearted towards anyone, and suddenly snapped. If I recall, the lonely guy got excluded for a couple days, but that was mostly to give him some time, all things considered. Story 31. This post will probably be buried, and I kind of hope it does get buried. When I was a teenager, I barely talked, kept to myself, etc. I had a dad who drank a lot and liked to push me around and occasionally take a swing or two at me. Mostly he threw heavy objects at me. He was always extremely mean to me. One day while I was around age 17, he said something demeaning to me and threw a bottle of window cleaner at me. Only he flung it at me so it had some spin and caught me really good in the chest. To give a little visualization, I was in the living room in front of the doorway and he was opposite me in the kitchen. Instead of tears, my whole body filled with intense rage and hatred when all the past cruelty welled up and just took over. I punched a hole through the wall connecting the kitchen to the living room. Only it wasn't the easy part where you just hit two sides of drywall. I busted through the living room wall, through the stud, and through the kitchen wall. My dad instantly went silent. Didn't look me in the eye or say a word to me for 2 years. We're good friends now that he's laid off the drink, but he's told my brother's girlfriend that he's absolutely petrified of me now. Story 32. I didn't see it, but was told about it by my dad, who is said to be a patient or gentle man. Normally never gets that annoyed by anything, and 9 times out of 10 lets my mom deal with most things. However, one day in the office, some series of events happened which made him snap, and he stood up, picked up his chair, and rammed it through the ceiling. He then walked off, and it was just left hanging there, jammed in the ceiling while the rest of the office stared in stunned silence. Fortunately, he's now happily retired. Story 33. This happened to my dad. It was at a family wedding reception in the 1950s. Two rough guys who were on motorcycles crashed the party. They were drinking at the bar and using bad language. One of the women asked the bride's father, Howard, who was in his 60s, to intervene. Howard was a former professional wrestler. Howard approached the man and said, "You boys will have to leave." The man said, "Screw you." My dad said that Howard put this guy in an arm lock so fast you wouldn't believe it. Howard said, "You're leaving now or I'm breaking your goddamn arm off." The man sheepishly left. Howard had a son, Mike, who was also a professional wrestler. Mike was not so nice. He was in the other room at the time, but had he known, he would have ended the guy. Story 34. My friend had broken his hip while running. Lame, I know, and was put in a wheelchair. He usually took things in stride and didn't mind idiots. But one day in the gym while in his wheelchair, a freshman had run up and started pushing him around against his will. We heard him saying, "Stop," and such, trying not to get mad. The kid nearly flipped over our friend and he visibly changed. He hit the brake, stopping the wheelchair in its tracks. The kid stood there like he was going to release the brake and get to push my friend again. My friend stands up from the wheelchair and spins around and grabs the kid by his collar and lifts him from the ground and just stares at him. After about 5 seconds, he just let the kid go and the kid ran off crying. He hobbled back to his wheelchair and wheeled over to us and began having a merry time joking about how scared the kid was. Story 35. I had a teacher in middle school, Mr. Wright. He was about 6'4" and one of the nicest men I've ever met. He always made time for anyone that asked for help, no matter what was going on. There was this kid named Trevor, who was the typical middle school schmuck. He always gave Mr. Wright a hard time, every single day. One day, we were turning in a bigger project, and Trevor goes up and says, "I didn't do it." Well, Mr. Wright goes, "Oh, really? What a surprise, Trevor." And then proceeds to flip the table at the front of the room, screaming, "What a surprise! You wouldn't have done it!" All the teachers' rooms had doors connecting the rooms together, so the two teachers on either side came running in to see what was wrong. The entire class was in shock at what had happened. The kid did his homework from then on, for what small amount of the year was left. Story 36. In my freshman year, we had the nicest biology teacher. He was like 3 feet, exaggeration, tall and wore fur-lined Green Bay Packer Crocs every day. Not a joke. She would let kids quietly chat as long as work gets done, and she was generally cool with lighthearted tomfoolery. One day, though, nobody was working. Everyone was goofing off, being loud and ignoring her. With the fury of 1,000 supernovas, she screams, "Enough!" The entire class stared at her and just quietly began working. The fact alone that a woman who was so chill and cool got pushed over the line snapped the class into shape instantly. She never did anything like that again, and everyone was respectful of her rules all semester. Story 37. My mother is a strong woman. Raising 3 boys and a girl by herself is no easy task, especially when we decide to lose it on each other. I'm the youngest of the boys and have been the one to witness all the ups and downs of the life we made from a degree of separation, largely ignored and left to my own devices. My mother handled things pretty well for working as much as she did and raising us to the best of her abilities. She was even-tempered and rarely disciplined us with force or violence. My oldest brother, let's call him M, was a brash and strong-willed person, even with her mother. Constantly, they would get into arguments over things, his grades, his friends, M smoking at such a young age. The only time her mother lost it is when M stepped over the line and called her mother a witch. The word came out. He said it loud and clear, and we all went silent. For a house with that many kids, it was not something that happened often. Our mother, with fury in her eyes, simply reached over and grabbed a broom without looking, all the while staring my brother down, looking him in the eyes, and never breaking her gaze from his. The moment he turned to run, she was on him like a cat running from a dog. She hit him over the back and broke the broom handle in 2. When he screamed that he was going to call the police on her, she hit him again and again as the broom handle broke. He tried to say something, and she picked up the first broken piece, now the biggest part of the broom, and struck again. He lay there and cried for a moment, and she just looked at him. Without breaking her side, she told my second oldest brother to go get the first aid kit. She then got on her knees and calmly told him that if she ever heard that word come out of his mouth again, the ambulance would be called before the cops were. I have never been more afraid in my life. Story 38. My dad's a pretty quiet dude. Usually keeps to himself and doesn't say much. One day, my family went to Amazing Jake's, and we were just chilling out, eating somewhere. My sister and brother got their first food, so they reserved the rest of our family a table. My sister was just talking to my brother, chilling, and some schmuck says, "Can your kids shut up? I'm trying to have some peace." My sister was about 16 and my brother was 17. My sister says, "If you wanted peace, why'd you come to an amusement center?" I guess that just triggered the schmuck because he stands up, gets his drink, and pours it in my sister's head. Little did the schmuck know that my dad had seen the whole ordeal while we were walking over there. My dad throws my mom's tray, walks over there while my brother is yelling at the schmuck, pushes my brother to the side and says, "Who the hell are you? You think you can yell at my kids?" I forgot to mention the schmuck is about a 6-foot bald guy, and my father is a pretty short, chubby dude. Anyways, the schmuck laughs in my dad's face, and my dad just loses it and hits the guy and knocks him out. Everyone was watching by that point. That guy's wife started screaming at my dad. The guy gets up right after that, then that's when the amazing Jake security came and stopped everything. We explained our story, and they reviewed everything on the camera, and we both refused to press charges because it would have been a crime for both of them. Story 39. I was at the mall with my dad once, a long time ago when I was like 14 or something. A couple of young punks a few years older than me snickered about his outfit as we walked past. And I don't know what the hell went through his head, but he told me to wait where I was and turned around to follow them. They were 10 or 20 feet away, and he walked up behind them, clamped a hand on their shoulders, and leaned in between the two of them. They squirmed and told him to let them go, but he held on, and I didn't hear what he said, but it was apparently something to the effect of, "You should show more respect to people because you never know who you're messing with." And then he let go and walked away. My dad was normally a patient and easygoing guy. I have no idea why he did this. Sounds like a cool dad moment, but it was honestly super cringy. A terrible lesson to teach his young son, and also just plain terrifying. The whole rest of the time we were there at the mall, I kept thinking those kids were going to come back and straight up terminate my dad. Story 40. I used to go to school with a smaller guy who had been a terrorist since kindergarten and had always gotten away with it. There was another guy who was about 6'3", 290 pounds, but was also an incredibly awkward pacifist. Small guy has a problem with the big guy's friend and starts badgering them. Big guy tells him to stop several times. Small guy has no understanding of the word consequences, so he continues. Big guy throws a mountain bike over his head at short guy and tries to chase down the small guy. To this day, I'm still moderately annoyed that I missed and couldn't catch the little schmuck. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.